battles.
If you reside in any of the great cities of the world or the land, whether it's Paris, New York City, Beijing, many others, you're familiar with the subway system. Of course, if you reside in Los Angeles, you're not familiar with the subway system, and you're confined to the rigors of driving on the 210, the 405, the 110, or heaven forfend the 5. Whatever the reality of your existence, though, you have to admit that the subway has a tremendous infrastructure signature to it. In other words, there was a lot of excavation done to dig out these immense caverns that the subways operate in. Some people really enjoy subways, such as General Katana. But whatever your thoughts are on subways, you have to admit that there was a lot of effort that went into their construction. Do we really think about how long these subways have been around? Because we see that, such as in New York City, the subway system is critical, especially if you want to bypass that surface traffic. And of course, the mainstream tells us that the reason there's no subway in the great city of Los Angeles is because the car companies conspired to keep it from happening. Only in Los Angeles, not in any other city, so I guess their plan didn't work out that well. Whatever the situation, when you look at the subway, though, you can't help but notice that there is a lot of infrastructure that's required to operate a subway, even when it's not operating underground. And how old is this infrastructure? Well, when you look at many of these building stones, you can see that they appear to be much older. What's the real story, though, behind the subway? When did it really start? What does the official historical account tell us? And what does this really tell us about the future of travel? Well, when we look at some of the images of the open subway areas, we can see the same precise architecture and the geometrical effort that went into establishing many of these arches in this particular subway tunnel. And whichever city that you happen to be in, you have multiple accounts of most of their initial subways starting in the 1890s to the 1910. Ah yes, that 20-year period when so many wonders were accomplished. It also happens to be that same period when we had the advent of heavy machinery. Because no matter how hard people or animals worked, there was no way you were going to excavate this amount of material. There's even some accounts that say that the initial subways in New York City required excavation of 12 miles worth of dirt. Now, granted, there's no pictures of dirt piled up 12 miles high, and you're probably not going to find any, which we could understand why. But we really have to ask this question. What kind of effort went into this? And when we look at these photographs that we have of the construction of the subway, we see many peculiar details that we certainly have to question. For example, does it look older than it really is? Why does a lot of the basic infrastructure and construction materials for establishing the subway appear so old, even though it's so new? This entryway here is very elaborately decorated. Is it possible that these subways might be much older than we realize, much as these buildings and structures that we explore? And why is it we always have to write these dates on these photos? Whether it's 1906, 1913, 1907. I mean, am I really looking at the construction of a subway here, or have they merely torn up the street just to get at these pipes? Because if the photo caption tells me that they're constructing the subway, well, then I'm probably going to think they're working on the subway. Is that really the situation, or is there something else going on? The other thing I find interesting is that when we look at a lot of these photos, we don't see examples of this incredible heavy machinery that was used to excavate it. Now, I'm not saying it's not present, merely that it's not displayed in many of the photos. Well, perhaps because it was so new, it needed to be kept secret. Of course, you see other strange photos that provide other pictures of the construction of the surface area of the subway or the railway. We will look at the rise of the railway within the United States especially because it's quite an amazing achievement. It's considered part of that American exceptionalism. Now, whether that's just a perception or a reality is certainly up for debate, but what's going on back here? We have this very interesting structure in the washed out portion of this old photograph. When you look at the subways, though, you can see that there are examples that would allude to the construction, but example here, this is supposed to be a subway construction photo, but it almost looks like we have a trolley going by, and the only thing I actually see them doing in this photograph is merely working on the surface and the tracks. Now, of course, you could say, well, they're establishing the initial subway. But it's all in the title, subway. It's underground, and that's what it's known for. The whole point of the subway in a place such as New York City is it enables you to bypass all the surface traffic. And indeed, it's essential if you're going to get from the north side of Manhattan Island to the south side of Manhattan Island. in a reasonable amount of time. Yes, you can take a taxi, but you're going to be banging around for quite some time. It's much more efficient to take the subway. And in California, it's much more efficient to take the 210 and sit in lanes of traffic when you're California dreaming or California nightmaring, whatever the situation may be. Are we really to believe, though, that this is the actual excavation of the subway? Pickaxes and shovels and people work so much harder. The animals work so much harder, too, in the 1890s to 1910, even though they also had that excavation equipment. There's also the situation with the pneumatic tunnel under Broadway that they talked about constructing in 1870 to 1873. And we even see examples of pneumatic message tubes. There was even one shown in The Simpsons when Mr. Burns wanted to talk to Pete Porter in Pasadena, which just happens to coincidentally lay off the 210 to this day and is the cause of much of the traffic jams there. I'm sure it's another coincidence. Here's another one of these images, though, where you get the impression that the infrastructure appears to be much older. How old are these pipes? How old are these bricks? When was this ribbing, if you will, actually established? How was it constructed? Why does it already appear so old? Well, here's the answers you'll get. Because it's very well documented that black and white photos make things look a little bit more older. And whenever they built anything new in the 1890s and the 1910s, it already looked old to begin with. Indeed, the rail tracks already looked old. The wood looked old. And you had time to just stand around and pose for photos, even though we're told about how hard people worked, how relentlessly that they worked. And then there's a conflicting account about the actual photographs themselves. But going past all that, I'm just considering the account of the subway system. What's the reality behind it? Is it possible, just possible, that these subway systems were already in existence in some way, shape, or form? Now, I'm not going so far in this exploration yet to suggest that there was some previous civilization that constructed these subway systems. But why do all these images, when we really step back and look at this, give the impression that these subways are actually being dug out? That instead of being built from scratch and excavated, that they appear to be cleaned out. They appear to be repaired and restored. Is that what's really going on? Or is it just merely the fact that there were limitations in what photographs they could actually capture at the time? This is a picture of one of the oldest, and indeed in the Guinness Book of World Records, the oldest subway in the world, constructed in the 1840s, originally as an open area, and then they bricked in the top of it. And this is considered the first quote-unquote underground railroad, if you will. Is that really the case behind it? And imagine the logistical difficulty and the challenges of any point in time, whether it's today or 1890 to 1910, really digging out a subway in the middle of a bustling city. Now, of course, you can look at the historical accounts of something such as New York City, where they had all the issues with having so many horses in the city at the same time. And how does the account of the pneumatic tubes actually fit into this? I almost said tombs, which kind of makes you wonder. All these things that are underground, when it was so difficult to get underground. But of course we can just assume that they could do it because they could also build these incredible structures that we see everywhere across the land. And indeed the portions of the subway or the rail line that runs in the surface. And imagine all the bridges and the elevated areas that they had to construct because, constructing elevated rail lines, that's a very easy process apparently. At least it was in 1890 to 1910. You don't see it happen as much. Not to say we can't do it today, we just opt not to do it. Really nice dome on this particular structure. What exactly are we looking at here, and what is this little structure all about? Is this another one of those special potties that we have, such as the one that we had in Paris? Just to give you an idea of scale, you can look over here at these horses in this cart, which appear to be a little bit closer to the camera. So what exactly is that structure? And then there's also the example of the Canton Viaduct in Massachusetts. Because even when they built the initial rails in the United States, there was a lot of infrastructure that had to go along with it. Trains weigh a lot, and they haul a lot, and therefore they require extensive bridges. There's also the fact that due to a lack of tractive force, trains can't go up slopes, or they require a lot of energy to do it. And when you look at this Canton Viaduct, you can see all the effort that went into constructing this. The finest engineering efforts of the 1830s. what they could do in the United States. Now, granted, no one's building a viaduct like this today because, well, it's just not efficient. And here you can see with the stone that we have, the foundation stone, and it says foundation stone on it, just to make sure you have no misconceptions. April 20th, 1834. Well, they should put a foundation stone, and they should have been very proud of that work. Of course, I'll still ask the question, why don't we do things like this today? For that matter, why don't we even use foundation stones? With a lot of the bricks that comprise this impressive viaduct, they even have the actual mason's marks on each of the bricks. Imagine how much time that would have taken. Were these marks originally part of the bricks, or were they added subsequently? I'm not suggesting any sort of conspiracy, merely asking questions, because you can see there are a lot of massive blocks that went into constructing this viaduct. Consider also the account of how they would have actually formed these blocks in 1830, how they would have transported them in place, how they would have set them so precisely. How much effort would it have really required? Because officially there was no heavy machinery available. Then we have this nice little information piece of the Canton Viaduct. I guess they had PowerPoint back in the 1830s, or someone made this subsequently, indeed having Excel in the 1830s. But you never know. Someone might come out and tell you, well, yes, it's very well documented that they had computers in the 1830s, and it's very well documented they had PowerPoint and Excel. Hey, look, I've got nothing against PowerPoint or Excel. It's just intriguing that we transpose the information in that viaduct with modern documents, because it's easy, I suppose. And then we also have no shortage of our drawings, our renderings, that show us the impressive construction of the subway right through the middle of the city. And that's the part that we often gloss over, because how extensive, if there was an existing underground rail system, would it have really been? Why do we have all these references to underground rails through time? And indeed, what's the actual unfolding of the chronology? Because you can see in some of these older photos, we have many of the impressive structures in the streets that have already been established. But how much effort really went into building these subways? And are they really going into the surface here, or are they just simply building on top of the surface? In other words, is it difficult to get the photos, or at that time frame with the limitations of photography, to obtain the photos, to really show the difficult excavation process? I think of the film Escape from New York and the deleted opening bank robbery scene where Snake Plissken and his friend Taylor attempted to escape the authorities of the United States Police Force. They used an underground rail line to escape from Colorado all the way to San Francisco. And in that particular fictional story, the Underground Railway ran all over the United States. And if you read the book on Escape from New York, it's a much more dystopian world. The Underground Railway was required because of gas attacks on the United States during the war in that fictional story. But the concept, though, of an actual underground rail line that connects major cities and major areas must be explored, because we have no shortage of modern expeditions where they're constantly excavating and exploring older subway lines. At least that's what they officially tell us. But what's the limitations behind it? Does it allude to the fact that there might have been a much more impressive and pre-existing infrastructure system? Or were these blocks really constructed? At least in this particular image, these blocks actually look a little bit newer, perhaps more what we would expect to see. And yes, it is possible to ascertain the difference between what's new and what's old, even monochromatic images in video. I can remember having a black and white TV and watching Star Trek The Next Generation on it, and things still look new even if it's monochromatic. And here we have an example of this underground subway, if you will, in New York, along with the brand spanking new New York Post Office that we've looked at before. And of course, it's just a rendering, but imagine the concept. It gives the idea that there is a possibility that these systems, that this entire infrastructure and this connection of underground railways were actually connected. And even think about that terminology, especially if in the United States. When you say underground railway, oftentimes there is a very particular connotation with it. And so what does it really mean? Also, what's the understanding between the difference between a trolley, a steam locomotive, and the use of rails? Did both use rails? Could both have used the same signature? Or just imagine, if you will, since we're considering ourselves with the future of travel, if you actually had a vehicle that could operate in all manners. that was powered through many different means and had different means of generating the original power. Then again, what kind of limitations would you have on ground travel? Because, as we'll explore with the trolley later in this exploration, imagine if you had all these options. You had the ability to travel underground, you had the ability to travel on the surface, and then you had the ability to travel on the air, or through the air. And consider the complete lack of limitations on that. Consider the fact that if you had the ability to move materials and improve your logistics, then you'd have no limits in terms of what you could construct. It would actually provide a reasonable explanation for why we have all these unbelievable, at least from our perception today, achievements, whether it's with the structures or even with the underground excavation. But we're just looking at one means right now because we do have numerous examples of the same kind of impressive architecture underground. And of course, we know that they had to have some capability to excavate the foundations for these great structures that we've looked at. But imagine excavating all this. 12 miles of dirt, or was it much, much more? And again, none of the images that we have really seem to convey that actual account that we have. We're told that yes, they did it. But how did they do it? Digging? Animal power? Or was there more advanced heavy machinery that we just simply weren't aware of? Because there are some conflicting accounts, and you might recall when we did our Panama Canal exploration, we looked at that original steam excavator that was apparently around in the 1800s. You remember that one that Teddy Roosevelt himself was driving and operating. So I don't know, maybe they had the ability to get Teddy Roosevelt to all these subways at the same time, and he personally supervised it. There's also the reality of the fact that there's extensive cave systems that exist, at least across the United States. And would it be possible that these cave systems could be connected? Or, even more absurdly, to the minds of some, is it possible that these cave systems are the remnants of some sort of underground highway? Some sort of transportation infrastructure that existed in the distant past, that parts of it were able to have been accessed more recently, and dare I say even pressed back into service, and then of course using our more quote-unquote modern transportation implements, our current version of the subway, if you will. Just think about all these things, and we're only concerning possibilities right now. But why is it that there's not an entire underground rail network that connects all the major cities of the United States? How much time would that save? How much effort would that save, whether you're talking logistics or the simple transportation of people? And how fast could some of these trains go, hypothetically speaking? What if you had more advanced rail systems that could travel much faster? Now, of course, people always talk about the infinite limitations behind everything, but I always find myself fascinated by the fact that there's limitations when there need to be, and yet there's no limitations when there needs to be, if you follow me. But looking at some of these photos where we always have people just standing around and posing and never smiling for whatever reason, we do have to ask those questions because they're not questions with easy answers. It's almost as though these images that we have, instead of simply answering our questions, always and invariably generate many more questions. And as I've stated, when you do image analysis, you have to remember, the image may be accurate, it may have been altered in some way, shape, or form. Again, no conspiracy is required to explain it. It could simply be an error with the actual processing, or maybe they were photographing something else. Maybe this wasn't the construction or the excavation of this subway tunnel. Perhaps this is merely an effort to clean it that happened after it was constructed. Again, I'm not suggesting any sort of conspiracy because people always seem to think that there's a conspiracy being suggested when in fact none is even being suggested. I guess some people always have it on their mind. And here you see an example of one of those earlier machines that apparently we had. But how mobile would it have been? What power system did it actually operate under? And official history tells us, well, it operated under steam power. Maybe so, but how effective were they? There were also different methods that we have drawings of the way they constructed the subways. Of course, we also have wonderful drawings and artistic renderings of the great pulley system that they used to put the blocks in place in Baalbek in what is today Lebanon. But don't you find it interesting that nobody could ever build a practical working example of one of these pulley moving systems? They couldn't even build a downscaled version of it, let alone the life-size version. So as always, I leave it to you to decide what to make of these images and what the real story behind the establishment of our subway systems are across the land. What are these photos really telling us? And why is it everything always seems to have a difficult origin story behind it? I mean, did they really just have thousands and tens of thousands of workers digging out the subways? If there was a historical account that told us that they managed to move 12 miles worth of dirt in 36 hours, and they said they did it, would anybody question it? Are there accounts that we have of certain incredible feats being done in a very short amount of time, currently, that no one questions? And what were the limits behind human labor and horse labor that we have? I mean, look at these carts. This is what they show us in this image, and this is what they incline to us, was the method that they used to cut out these subways. But then we have conflicting images such as this that show more advanced machinery, apparently. So what was really going on? Were they using a variety of different methods? Or was it the fact that they actually found a lot of this machinery, to include the excavation machinery? And that's how we actually explain the presence of these incredible subways. But what are your thoughts? Why didn't we ever follow up with the pneumatic tube? Why didn't they really construct an underground rail line in the United States or in other nations? Or did they? Welcome to the Restitutor Orbis channel, and today we'll be exploring railroads, America's greatest miracle. We often search for explanations in how it was the United States and Canada managed to build such extravagant nations when nothing existed there in the 19th century, and railroads provide us with a simple explanation. Imagine yourself going down a railroad in the 19th century and you come across these incredible edifices, especially in Canada where they put such effort into building grand hotels that strangely enough resembled castles. Incredible castles with wondrous turrets and many arches and buildings that seem to exceed the imagination. Or chateaux, as they're also known as in the French-speaking area. Let's look at the timeline of the United States railroads. 1797, the steam locomotive was invented in England. 1823, the first public railway in England. 1827, the first railway in North America made by merchants. In 1840, rail expands 2,800 miles in the United States. In 1850, they were up to 9,000 miles. So in 30 years, 9,000 miles of railway. 1862, transcontinental railway construction begins. It'll link California. The Civil War occurs, and then in 1863, they set the gauge. 1869, the Golden Spike, making the first transcontinental railroad, and by 1881, merely 50 years later, they had 100,000 miles, and in 1886, something miraculous happened. When we look at the United States and we can see the map of how rapidly the railroads expanded, the first railroad in 1829, and by 1880, they had 100,000 miles of railroad. And here you can get a little bit of an idea in this map. This is a stunning, miraculous achievement because these were the highways of their time. And a lot of people will say, well, this was easy to do because to build a railroad, all you have to do is just lay the tracks and then drive in the spikes. Of course, you also have to tunnel through mountains because you can't go up a very high slope on a railroad, and you also have to build very large bridges to keep them as level as possible. So there's a lot more that goes into this than simply constructing a railroad. However, we also have to consider some of the construction challenges at the time because we're told that different railroads, especially in the South of the United States, had a different gauge. In other words, the width between the two tracks. Here in this legend, we can see that many of the tracks in the South of the Confederacy had a 5-foot gauge. And on top of all that, they constructed the Transcontinental Railroad, 1,928 miles linking the United States through varied terrain, and I can assure you that when you go across the Rockies, there was a lot of elevation changes. Now, they had a crew of tens of thousands, Chinese, Irish, and other immigrants, and as we're told, the immigrants to the United States were capable of stunning achievements, especially when you were willing to pay them and send them to remote areas. They even had Tom Cruise helping them until he jetted off to go to Oklahoma. This is the individual who's responsible for the railroads, Grenville Dodge, and he was supposedly a spy master during the Civil War and a railroad genius. Here he is briefing President Lincoln in 1859. He also got into a fist fight with one of his subordinates during the Civil War when he was a general. Yes, United States Civil War, where they had time to get into fist fights and pose for pictures. And here he is shaking the hand once the Transcontinental Railroad is completed, and here's a picture of him later in his life, where it looks like he still wants to punch somebody. I guess he never lost that desire to do so. We start with very modest steam engines when we look at the original ones from the early 19th century. We see that many of these steam engines were very small, and this is something that it looks like you could easily transport this on a ship. We're even told that the original steam engines were built in England and then transported across the Atlantic to the United States. Apparently that was a very easy achievement at the time, until the United States developed and built its own steam engines, and then developed its own railroad. So despite the fact that the United States came to the game a little bit late, they still managed to build more track than the rest of the world by the 1850s. A very stunning and miraculous achievement, and certainly one that we have to take at face value. When you look at these different rudimentary steam engines, you realize that they started off very small and very modest. And you think about how something that was not even proof of concept or attempted at that time quickly developed into large steam engines. And here we see one of the rotunda buildings that we see in many of our bird's eye views that we look at in explorations. And of course the Civil War, where they managed to trail around large mortars that apparently had nuclear-tipped shells on them that enabled them to burn large cities in the South, and even in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, when the South raided the North. And here we see a steam engine that's exploded. It's an intriguing concept when we realize that there were so many aspects that went into the railroad. And it also led to the destruction of the buffalo. At least that's what the official story tells us, and here we see this large pile of buffalo hides. So much of America being built around the railroad, and consider the vast infrastructure that was required. Oftentimes they had to dig large tunnels, and here we see masonry construction to support those tunnels. So it wasn't just laying the railroad, an impressive enough achievement for thousands, tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands of miles. It was also building all this incredible masonry construction everywhere you look. These tunnels that oftentimes had to go through large granite mountains. Tunnels that had to remain level, along with the stunning bridges that they constructed to support the weight of these trains and all the cars that they pulled as they went over them. Of course, they put the year on these tunnels because it's important to know when they were constructed. And we have many photos that show the wonderful congregations around the trains and this achievement in building a nation with the railroads. This was something that supposedly gave the United States a great advantage. And there's a lot of myth that it comes into when we consider the quote-unquote Old West, or the Ancient West, as they say in some science fiction publications. Of course, you'll see a darker side with it. There were a lot of reports of forced labor and vast corruption. There's even a book about Grenville Dodge, the genius who pioneered the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, being somewhat corrupt. You also have many of these elaborate structures that accompany the railroad, such as this terminal, it seems. Beautiful masonry construction, and yet also innovative methods of unloading coal and construction materials on bridges that look like they've been in existence for a long time. Of course, we'll be told that was rustication. There are some pictures of some more rudimentary railroads, where it doesn't look like they even had full cross tiles, and one could see that the gauge on that railroad would be a little bit easier to change potentially. And then, of course, we have these strange photos of the construction train, where people such as Tom Cruise rode and then prepared to construct new aspects of the railroad. We even have bridges that were made entirely out of wood, an interesting premise. And then, of course, we have our stone bridges, and it's even stated on the railroad official history that the stone bridges wouldn't burn in fire. I guess I never heard of the city fires. This is the Kate Shelley Bridge in Boone, Iowa, and when it was constructed in the early 20th century, it was the longest and tallest two-rail bridge in the world. Of course it would be, and in Iowa, where else would it be? And you can see that we have some very convincing construction photos, so there's no reason to ask more questions about this. There are many large and long stone bridges across many places in the United States that still exist to the day. And when mixed with these tunnels, it's an impressive achievement that not only did they build the railroads, but they managed to build the infrastructure to support the railroads. From 1829 to 1880, they built 100,000 miles of railroad. They built the tunnels, and then in Canada, they even built their own transcontinental railroad and very impressive hotels that resemble castles. Resemble very pretty castles that look like something out of a fairy tale land. Or even a castle that you call a chateau that really looks like it's out of a fairy tale land. Because why wouldn't you? And the interiors are no less impressive, with vast columns and pillars and beautiful decorations, because if you're staying in a railroad hotel, you need to have the greatest opulence and luxury, as you've seen in many of the Union stations that we've looked at in our city explorations on this channel. No expense and detail spared, and only the finest luxury for those traveling the railroad in the 19th and early 20th century. And yet there are so many questions that we have with many of these early photos that indicate how far and how fast the train expanded across the United States and Canada. And of course we'll see construction crews that don't particularly appear to be very busy, but perhaps it was like the Civil War. They just caught them during break time and snapped a photo, and that was also between fistfights. You have many different interesting photos, though, that show elaborate structures and infrastructure that support the railroad. These buildings that seem out of place, the evolution of the steam engine. And then you look and compare that with some of the footage that we have that shows them ramming steam engines into each other in the early 20th century. It's an intriguing juxtaposition of considerations, and yet the railroad was the primary means of transportation infrastructure that allowed the United States and Canada to become the nations they are. And now we look at the 1886 miracle. In 1886, the track gauge in the South United States was at 5 feet, and it needed to be reduced to 4 feet 8.5 inches. There was exactly 11,500 miles of track needing to be changed to this standard gauge, and this map shows you all the tracks in what was formerly the Confederate States of the United States. The change was planned to occur from May 31st to June 1st, one single day. In 36 hours, tens of thousands of workers moved the track to the new gauge. Consider this. One side of track for 11,500 miles. One of the most stunning and momentous achievements. They planned it for months, but still had to execute it in 36 hours. So just think on that. In the 19th century, with preparation, you can move track for 11,500 miles in 36 hours. Now watch out. Here comes the 18th century. We'll do it for you in 36 minutes! Just consider this. Stunning achievements of the past. And this was done without disruption or notice. In fact, there's no documentation of this. There are no images of moving the track. It happened so fast. You just have this drawing. What do you think of this miraculous achievement?
I'm no sorcerer, but I'll gladly test your steel, old friend.
Welcome to the Restitutor Orbis channel, and today we're going to be exploring the trolley, or forbidden transit. Now, why would we classify a trolley as a forbidden transit system? We see many examples of trolleys in our various explorations, and yet, for whatever reason, despite the fact that our society is focused on achieving cleaner, greener energy now in this contemporary era, we seem to have forgotten about the trolley in a lot of respects. I remember how I was first exposed to the trolley. It was on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I always remember the trolley coming in. That was the very first time I saw one in my life, because there were certainly no trolleys in the Midwest United States where I grew up in. Now, if you grew up in San Francisco or somewhere else, you saw the trolley. What exactly is the official historical account behind the trolley? Well, here in this image from Washington, D.C., we're seeing how the trolleys operated. We're told that trolleys began as horse-drawn vehicles, especially in Europe in the early 1800s. And I'm also going to refrain from using 19th and 20th century, as that can be a little confusing. So in the early 1800s, this is what we had, horses that pulled trolleys around. Now, it is possible for horses to do this, although is this the most efficient arrangement? And why on earth would you want to establish a vehicle or something like this, the streetcar? Trolleys are also called trams, and I know some people get very wrapped around the bend about exactly what you're supposed to call it, but they're known as trams, trolleys, streetcars. The whole concept, though, of having horses pull trolleys is quite intriguing, because it seems as though it'd be a little bit of a logistical challenge, because you have all those animals in a small amount of space, and then, of course, those animals do things, such as defecate, and you have to remove the defecation. And we often talk about that in our early images of the cities. There's also the challenge of the animals having limitations on them. Now, our official history tells us that over time, eventually, the trolleys evolved with an electrical system, and some were even gas-powered in due time. But an intriguing aspect that we see in these trolleys, in these old images, that they had a lot of different uses. And there also seems to be something dare I say, out of place with having horses pull these trolleys around. Now, the whole concept of having train tracks with wheels and very limited contact space between the wheels and the tracks is the very principle behind the train, and why a train does not take that much tractive force to pull a large or heavy vehicle. So that's why I say it's possible that horses could do it. But as time went on, they evolved and then they adapted the electrical system. And we've seen the trolley in many of our explorations that we've done. Now, what we believe and what a lot of our mainstream historical accounts will tell us is that the trolley only operated in the major cities. Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, the other major cities of the United States and Europe and elsewhere in the land that employed the trolley. It was a very efficient mass transit system and it allowed people to get around the city. But would you be surprised to know that the trolley was not confined to the large cities, as they were at that time? For example, here we have the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, and we looked at that building before, and here we see many trolleys or streetcars or trams lined up, along with some horses. Quite a parade going on, and a very interesting image that provides different clues. Now just imagine, though, if you had trolleys not just in every city, but also in the small towns. Now you might be asking, well, Aurelian, I think you're going a little too far out there, because why would there be trolleys in small town USA or small town Europe? Well, would you be surprised to know that we do actually have some documentation, so you could say it is quote unquote well documented, that we have trolleys that were used in small towns. And not just any small towns, but some of the smallest towns in the United States. And small towns that were small in the 1800s, and they're still small to this day. In fact, when we look around here, we see in Tama, Iowa, we have a trolley. Now this is interesting because Tama, Iowa, a town of only a couple thousand people, it's always been a small town and likely always will be a small town. They have a picture of a trolley next to their major hotel, which is concealed by these trees here in this image, and very interesting image that it is. I recall seeing a postcard, though, where it said that the trolley was added later, a postcard of Tama, Iowa, as it is. But there's also other towns around the Midwest, small towns that seem to employ the trolley. Now, why exactly would these small towns need the trolley? And not to be derogatory towards Tama, Iowa, but frankly, I could run through that town in just a few minutes on feet. Why exactly do you need a trolley to go through Tama, Iowa? Or a trolley in some of these other towns, whether you're in Wisconsin, Missouri, or even the small towns in Virginia, as it is, again, well documented that trolleys operated in these small towns. Now, let's think about this. If this was a trolley transit system, would it just operate in the small town? Or would it actually be part of a larger system? For example, here we're in Appleton, Wisconsin. Appleton. I wonder if one of those individuals pictured there is Willem Dafoe's grandfather, as Willem Dafoe is from Appleton, Wisconsin. In fact, could one of those individuals be Willem Dafoe? Isn't it amazing how often that guy seems to crop up, Mr. Michelangelo himself? Anyway, back on topic. We have the trolley, though, in many small rural communities. And what I'm suggesting is perhaps the trolley infrastructure was a lot more extensive than we're led to believe. Perhaps it was really the mass transit system, especially in the United States and quite likely Europe as well, where we had all the communities connected, and it worked quite well and quite efficiently. Now, we think about our theories of a previous civilization that no doubt used the trolley system. And if you think about it, if you have a mass transit system that facilitates rapid transport from the rural areas to the cities, suddenly it completely changes the dynamic of how your cities operate with your population. A lot of people have asked me questions in terms of how populated do I think the cities in the old world or the previous civilization really were? Well, we don't know. And we also have to consider the fact that if we had the ability to achieve rapid transit from the rural areas to the cities, and it was feasible, and you were able to do it without having gridlock or vast amounts of traffic and the inability of people moving from small rural communities to cities in a rapid amount of time, it completely changes the dynamic of a civilization. Now just imagine if you did have a reliable mass transportation system. Now it is true that we do have some examples, and we will be exploring the subway in due time, especially the New York City subway. But you can see where mass transit would work, as opposed to, say, Los Angeles, where you don't really have an effective mass transit system, and you're reliant on your car. Although ironically, when we look at the mainstream account for the official demise of the trolley, we'll see that the car, or the automobile, as Mr. Worf would say, had a lot to do with it. Some of these images, though, really strike our imaginations because we're able to see how the trolley affected life at that time and how different that would have been. And if you think about it, let's just say you live in a small town and you're able to jump on the trolley and then 20 minutes later you're in downtown Chicago. That has a completely different look. Now, we can compare and contrast this to what we have with the subway in New York City, where you're up on 110th and Cathedral, you hop on the subway, and then the next thing you know, you're on 5th Avenue. Okay, there's a few stops, but it's relatively efficient and it works very well. Nice building here in the background of this particular image. So we see so much with a lot of these trolleys, and we can get an idea of what capability they had. Here's an image from Hurley, Wisconsin. Now, Hurley, Wisconsin is not a very large populated town. Population of maybe 1,500 to this day, and certainly not ever exceeding that, and yet they had a trolley that ran right through the town. Quite interesting. Not only did they have a trolley, they also had a very nice county courthouse there as well, with a rather castle or manor-like appearance to it as well. Although it's no longer a courthouse, it's now a museum, at least we can take comfort or solace in the fact that it still stands as a museum. I would like to visit this one as well. Indeed, Hurley's been added to my explorations list. And not only did they have trolleys, they apparently also had a trolley that had a snow removal capability. What a novel idea! So, an electric-driven vehicle in a very small town, nice building again, in Hurley, Wisconsin. Not a very large town, and yet they had the ability to employ trolleys, and not just trolleys or streetcars, but also in a snow removal capacity. Unfortunately, the trolley eventually vanished, and here we have the last streetcars operating in Detroit. And in our exploration of Detroit, we certainly saw what an incredibly beautiful city it was in the past. And so we can see that for whatever reason, the trolleys were removed from the urban areas. And then we ask, well, why exactly were the trolleys removed from the smaller towns? And the answer will be, well, if they were removed from the urban areas, and the infrastructure and the financial support to continue them just simply wasn't there. We're going to take a closer look, though, at what our official account is for why we decided to remove trolleys from our mass transportation system. I mean, if you really think about this, an electrically driven vehicle, and we can see the trolley map here in Atlanta, Georgia. Isn't this intriguing, though, because we also see this 1902 map showing the trolley lines in Atlanta, Georgia, or the streetcars, or the trams. And we also see the town of Decatur. Although when we recall our Atlanta exploration, we might remember that Decatur was established before Atlanta was. Very interesting. When we see these images, though, it's very obvious that they still use the electrically driven trolleys with the horse-driven trolleys. Now, why exactly was that? Was it just because of the availability? We're told that in places like New York City, they had to forbade horses from moving around in Manhattan because there was too much defecation. And again, looking at this picture, we see almost a conflicting account in the picture itself, with the electrically driven trolley and then the horse-driven trolley. Now, the other thing we always talk about is, where were the vast stables for all the horses that operated in the cities at that time and made the cities operational? Because we're told they weren't relying on trolleys. We contrast this with the Watertown Historical Society, or the Hysterical Society, as some of my contemporaries used to call it, in Wisconsin, and we can see how they're supposedly laying lines for the trolley cars to operate, and then we see their current historical society, and yet we have lines established. So again, another conflicting account. There's also a lot of variance with the types of trolley or streetcars that we see, with different design types, and yet they seem to have a wide variety of capabilities. And I have to admit, I'd never seen the image of the snow removal trolley, or tram, or streetcar that we saw in Hurley. And then even other small towns, whether we're in Virginia, or essentially anywhere in the land where you have these wires that were established rather quickly. Of course, then we still have the question in terms of the other older city photos that we've seen. What exactly were all the wires? Because some seem a lot more extensive than simply to operate trolleys or telegraphs. So, going on with the theory, it appears that the previous civilization did have an extensive mass transit system. Now, what would be the purpose of trolleys? Well, deconflict that with what's going on with the possibility of airships. Now, we're going to be exploring airships as part of a live stream exploration this coming weekend. But what would be the advantages of having a reliable mass ground transit system mixed in with an air transit system? What kind of capabilities would that give you as a society and a civilization? Also imagine if you had more advanced construction capabilities. And of course, we can see in this image the unfortunate reality for the end of the great trolley or the streetcar in many American cities. And yet many of these look in pristine condition now, even as they're piled for demolition, salvage, or scrapping. So it paints many different pictures in terms of what was really going on with the trolley. I also appreciate the fact that now we have a trolley that's essentially a bus and you can go around in St. Louis. That building behind there looks rather familiar. Trying to remember where I've seen that before. Yes, they do have one that goes right up to the Basilica of St. Louis, and I highly recommend it. It's probably one of the best ways to get around there. But we have maps of other great cities, such as Buffalo, which we've explored, and we can see just how extensive and in-depth this transit system was. And Buffalo seeming to be a prime example of one of the great hubs or one of the great cities in the pre-existing civilization, and it had a very well-developed infrastructure. Even Des Moines, Iowa had a rather extensive trolley system and network of lines that ran through the entire city. Quite interesting given the rapid development of Des Moines, which we've explored quite extensively, and I highlight it to say that once again it's no exception from the trolley system that existed at that time. And indeed, many of the university and colleges had trolleys or electric railroads in the early 1900s that ran right up and through the campus, and there were numerous depots to where the students could rapidly commute from wherever they were living. What a novel idea! And how efficient as well that you could quickly move students around, even in small colleges such as the Iowa Agricultural College, now known as Iowa State University. And we're not going to be talking about any of the symbols that we may see at Iowa State University, but we are going to show that it's very clear they had an electric railroad. And indeed, there's still an old station there that's been converted to a student break area, and there's lots of lovely vending machines there. So we can see there are numerous examples of how the trolley operated. Now, it's considered a little bit of a link to a lost era in America, or the United States, at least that's how I'll say it, and you don't see as much in terms of reference to the trolley in Europe, although it is quote-unquote well documented that it existed there as well, and you can find numerous images of trolleys operating in large European cities. And yet, other images such as this, which seem to really clue in to how widespread the trolley truly was. It was not limited to the cities. It was in the rural areas. Now, what makes more sense to you? Are we to believe our official account that trolleys really did develop in the cities and then they just happened to get an electric trolley in every single small town, especially across the United States, to include Tama, Iowa, Hurley, Wisconsin, Virginia, and everywhere else that you could possibly imagine? Or is it more likely that we really have a pre-existing mass transit system of trolleys that were repurposed, reactivated, salvaged, and as the technology developed, or as the technology was rediscovered, or disclosed, whatever theory you want to go with, that the current civilization was able to reactivate them for a period of time, and that they used them until they no longer had their uses, and therefore they had to be discarded. And we'll find many examples in numerous images, and you can find in every historical society across the United States that it is very well documented, the extensive use of the trolley, streetcar, tram, every city, every small town. But what exactly was the story behind the demise of the trolley, especially in the United States? Why did such an efficient and even, dare I say, a very preferred energy usage mass transit system suddenly become discarded, especially at the time frame it was discarded? Well, let's take a look at that account and see what it tells us. So we're going to take a look at an article from our good friends at Vox. Now, I'm not exactly preferential to doing this type of exploration, but I feel that highlighting some elements of this article will tell us the story, especially from the mainstream, behind the demise of America's once mighty streetcars. And this was written by Joseph Stromberg, May 7th, 2015, so about 9 years ago, but he does provide a very good point-by-point account for how the mighty streetcar diminished, and gives us some figures here. Back in the 1920s, most American city dwellers took part in public transportation, 17,000 miles of streetcar lines across the country. Certainly not comparing to the rail lines, but quite extensive nonetheless, and we have to wonder about that. Here we go. There's this widespread conspiracy theory that the streetcars were bought up by a company, National City Lines, which was effectively controlled by GM, so that they could be torn up and converted into bus lines. And indeed, it's also a plot point of the 1980s film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. At least there was an element about buying up the streetcar there so they could build the interstate. But I digress. But that's not actually the full story. Of course, it never is. But it is part of the story. So is this a conspiracy theory that's been debunked, or is this merely a partially true conspiracy theory? Once again, conflicting accounts in this article. By the time National City Lines was buying up these streetcar companies, they were already in bankruptcy. I see. So they're going to tell us that it was because of the needs and desires and the will of the people that they had provided them the automobile, which was quite affordable in the early 20th century, that it ended the golden age of the streetcar. And indeed, they recount in the 1800s how the animal-drawn streetcar lines, and there's nothing questionable about that, were across the United States. And we're not even going to talk about the ones in the small towns because they just don't count. We'll just highlight some of the larger ones in the city. And what's also interesting in this article is that it talks about some major depots that we don't think about as mass transit cities, such as Atlanta. I guess they'd never heard of MARTA in Atlanta, which moves a paltry 50 million people every year. Oh well. The decline of the streetcar after World War I, when cars began to arrive on city streets, is often cast as a simple choice by consumers. Of course, what else would it be? As a Smithsonian exhibition puts it, Americans choose another alternative, the automobile. The car became the commuter option of choice for those who could afford it, and more people could do so. Now, how exactly was it more people could afford the car? Well, we know the official story because Henry Ford came up with the rapid assembly line process, because we never had the assembly line process before, except, of course, for when they did at that massive armament in Venice that we looked at from, about 1,000 years before Henry Ford came up with it. But let's forget about that. It doesn't count. And then, what was the real issue? The reality is more complicated. People weren't choosing to ride or not ride in some perfect universe. They were making it in a messy real-world environment. Well, isn't it always a messy real-world environment? That just seems like an excuse. The real problem was that once cars appeared on the road, they could drive on streetcar tracks, and the streetcars could no longer operate efficiently. Once just 10% or so of the people were driving, the tracks were so crowded that the streetcars weren't making their schedules, Norton says. In some places like Chicago, streetcars retained dedicated rights-of-way, and they survived. Pretty much anywhere else, they were doomed, with 160,000 cars cramming onto Los Angeles streets in the 1920s. And how many cars do we think are cramming on there now in the 2020s? Mass transit riders complained of massive traffic jams and hour-long delays. And so, once again, it seems as though, yes, this change in transportation systems, and you can even find Dean Kamen talking about this when he was inventing the Segway, lamenting the fact that our last mile to travel within point A to point B in cities is broken because of these cars. What's more, in many cities, the streetcars' contracts required them to keep the pavement on the road surrounding the tracks in good shape. So wait a minute. What they're saying then is that basically there was regulation that hamstrung all of these streetcar companies or these trolley companies, and paying for the maintenance got more and more difficult, and they were also locked into a 5-cent fare, which wasn't indexed to inflation. Wait a minute. Why in the heck would any company that's even trying to maintain its basic operation not factor in inflation at any point in time? Unless we're to believe that inflation was not an issue in the distant past? Very strange. After World War I, the value of 5 cents plummeted, but streetcars had to get approval from municipal commissions for any fare hikes. So regulation. So isn't it interesting how the government, only in Chicago do they impose regulations so the streetcar could actually not be interfered with by the automobile, and yet everywhere else the automobile made the streetcar impractical. Of course, the automobile also makes itself impractical with all the vast gridlock. You ever try driving around Los Angeles anytime between 9 to 5 on any given day, to include the weekends? And let's not even talk about the 405 or the 210. And isn't this intriguing? The public had little sympathy for the traction magnates who'd entered into these contracts. Today, many progressives and urbanists are boosters of streetcars, but back then they were often seen as a bastion of corruption, because the railroad wasn't, and automobiles were certainly not seen as a bastion of corruption, at least not in the 1920s. There's always an excuse for it, isn't there? Especially because of their owner's history of violent strike breaking. Yes, of course. The quiet death of the streetcar. Because of these factors, some streetcar companies began going into bankruptcy as early as the 1920s, even though the article starts by telling us that was the heyday, but whatever, again, conflicting accounts. Isn't it also intriguing that as they fought to stay alive during the Great Depression, many companies invested in buses which were cheaper and more flexible? Initially, they operated mainly as feeder systems to bring commuters to the end of lines, but as time went on, they began to replace some lines entirely. So it seems as though we have this account that, in reality, the way they developed the system with automobiles and the facilitation of the system by government, it was designed to remove the trolleys. Now, is that a conspiracy theory? No. The article will tell us it's simply because it was the will of the people. The will of the people to have an automobile. And I'll be honest with you all, I'm a great fan of the automobile. I appreciate driving around in my car, especially on a nice county road, and being able to go as fast as I want to. Okay, well, within the speed limit, but you know what I mean. You have the ability to rapidly move around. But yet, whenever you go into a city, you may as well be walking, especially if you're anywhere in Los Angeles, Chicago. It just doesn't work. I mean, Dean Kamen wasn't lying. He was absolutely right when he said the last mile in the city was broken. So what killed the streetcar? The simplest answer is that it couldn't compete with a car on an extremely uneven playing field. Oh, okay. You see, there's always a simple answer. It's not a conspiracy theory. It just couldn't compete with a car, and the people exercised their will. And let's not even talk about where the car came from or how it could have mixed with the trolley. Imagine if the government had actually imposed regulations across the nation in all the cities where they retained the trolley or the streetcar or the tram. How different would things have been? But what's your opinion? I would love to hear it in the comments. What do you think the trolley, the streetcar, or the tram originally was? And why do you think we don't have the streetcar today, even though we have a focus on restoring and installing cleaner energy? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for joining me. Please like, comment, and subscribe.
I'd love to stay, but
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the live stream, Astounding Airship Photos on the Restitutor Orbis channel. I'm your host, Lucius Aurelian, and thank you for joining me. Let's begin the greetings. Hello, Barbara. Hello, Oliver. Hey, Sky Sage, good to see you. Timothy Hoy, welcome. Breaking Free from Narcissism, good to see you. Kathy, welcome. Brown Dwarf, hello. New West Reset, welcome. Melissa Mao O'Donnell. Adam Bomb, good to see you, brother. OPM Smut, good to see you. Carl Lindbergh, great name, good to see you. Robert, welcome. Jamie, good to see you, brother. Breaking Free from Narcissism, welcome. Pullover, welcome. Hey, Nish Shelby. Hey, Music Holds the Secret. Hey, Tartarian Prog Rocker. Hey, K-Pop, good to see you. Hey, Chad Preston, Official 3. We'll see if we can meet your request. Rebecca B, welcome. Good to see you, RB. Hey, Sherry, welcome. And Cross-Threading, welcome. I think I've got everybody. Oh, Sarah, don't let me forget you. See who else we've got. S. Lee, Maggie Shepard, Daniel, Illuminating Manuscripts, Inferno, good to see you. M. Rose, all right. Jesus loves you for all eternity. Be blessed yourself. And Marcus, welcome. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and get started because it looks like everybody's getting in on this one right away, so I'm not too surprised. Hey, InfoWayne, good to see you. So I thought we would just take the opportunity to really enjoy looking at some airship photos and really enjoy exactly all that they have to offer. So you could say that we're going to do some exhibitionary photo viewing a little bit. Now, we're going to look at all types of airships, and we're going to see many different aspects of what they have to offer. And we're also going to see how they could have possibly linked back to a previous civilization. And there are some interesting photos that a lot of people haven't seen that I managed to scrounge up for this particular live stream. So I hope you enjoy. And as always, go ahead and feel free to make your comments as we go. Let me know if you have any recommendations for other photos you'd like to see. And if you enjoy this particular live stream, certainly let me know as we go, and we can definitely do another one. So we're going to start with the Graf Zeppelin right here. Now, of course, we know the difference between the rigid airship and the blimp, the rigid airship being what we see with the Graf Zeppelin, and then the blimp being more of the balloon. Hey, Warrior Class, good to see you. But I found this picture rather interesting because it shows the Graf Zeppelin going over Davenport. Hey, Isaac, good to see you. Hey, Kitch, welcome. Yeah, exactly, Sky Sage, and welcome, Sky Sage. Good to see you. Good to see you. Thanks, RB. I appreciate that. Way to start the night off well. Hey, Angel Luck, good to see you. So, what we know about airships is that we believe they were the primary transit or primary transportation device of the previous civilization. I mean, if you think about it, you've got an airship, you can go anywhere at any point in time. You're not limited by the ground, you're not limited by where you can and can't go. And what's really intriguing to us about the airship is the fact that you can land essentially anywhere. You can go on a tower anywhere, you can go to a large church, a large building, or at least what we think of as a church today. And when you go to it, you can actually land or connect to it. And we have a lot of images that indicate that. So the Graf Zeppelin, famous because it made that rapid traverse around the globe, the world, the lands, or so we're told. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. And by the way, CK Malcolm, it's good to see you. And for those of you who made your 6-month anniversaries, I sent you a welcome. So it's really good to see everybody. Yeah, you're right, Scotty. It is the best way to fly. And it was considered a real way to fly at that time. It was considered luxurious. It was considered easy, but we're going to see everything. We're going to see the luxury. We're going to see the aspects of the airship that made it something that seemed to be a bit of a novelty. And yet there are many clues behind it that show us it could have been so much more. So well, I'm glad everybody is starting off the night so happy. And again, special thanks to Rebecca. So thank you for that, Rebecca. So here's one of the odder type of airships. Now, I'm going to be honest, I didn't do all the research behind every single one of these photos. I just looked up some of the details because I thought we would look at some of these airships. And there's a great question right there from I Am Kairos. We honestly don't know. In fact, when you brought up the whole account with the Graf Zeppelin going around the lands, around the world, or however you want to say it, there's conflicting accounts on that. Did it take about a month? Did it take 21 days? There's even some rumors that said that it took 24 hours. Now, that seems very fantastic. I think it's important that we question everything. Hey, Officer Donut, good to see you. And Jamie brings up a good point, the helium fiasco. And that's something that came up with the whole concept that, let's be honest, we've been indoctrinated, and I'm going to use that word very directly, that airships are dangerous. Whether it's the Hindenburg explosion, which just happened to have a camera there to record it in the 1930s of all times, or if you've ever watched a little 1970s movie directed by John Frankenheimer called Black Sunday, where they attacked the Super Bowl with a Goodyear blimp. I'm not joking. They really made a movie in the 1970s where they attacked the Super Bowl with a Goodyear blimp. And you see people running scared from the blimp. So, yeah. Hey, Tartarian Prog Rocker. I wanted to make sure I said hello to you. So, yeah. But what are your thoughts on this initial image that you have with this very unique looking airship, blimp, or balloon? They're all the same. For airship, we're including all uses because, as I Am Kyra said, we don't know the exact capabilities. We can speculate. But, oh yeah. Isn't that funny, Tracy? Good call out there. Oh yeah. You're right, CK Malcolm. You're right. We'll take a look at one towards the end. And honestly, they've never really gone away. It's just how they've gone about using them over the years is what's really changed. So, oh, good one there, Hairless Primate. Yeah, the 1890s mystery airship flap. And it wasn't just one airship. They said they saw airships all over the place. Yeah, isn't that funny, Adam Bomb? Good point on that one. With the 1970s movie, you'd think Goodyear would be done, but they made the proper marketing choice of allowing the film to use their blimps, but then they had to remove the Goodyear name from it. So if you watch that movie, you won't see it. Oh, yeah. Okay, Kitch, yeah, good point. No, and you'll see that, RB. You'll see that there's a couple that look a little bit more aerodynamic. So, oh, yeah. Oh, welcome, Marilyn. Glad you could catch one. Thanks, A-Belt. Good to see ya. Well, and that's a good question, too. And it's very interesting how they seem to control this technology a lot more tightly than we've seen in the past. Okay, look, I had to include a picture of an airship next to the Iowa State Capitol. Okay, I know you're laughing at me. You say, Aurelian, you need to get some help. You need to get some help to get away from the Iowa State Capitol. I get it. But I couldn't help but notice that they had a picture of a unique airship next to my favorite dome. Now, what do you think of this smaller model that we have here? Hey, good to see you, J-Man. Welcome. And you have so many different dimensions behind these. I mean, these things could be gigantic, one being 700 feet long. I think that was the R101 from the United Kingdom. And then you got small 1 to 2 person airships like this. So, oh yeah. And then suddenly that cupola up at the Iowa State Capitol, which, by the way, does still have a stairway that goes to it, although you can't access it. Suddenly that makes a lot more sense if that's a docking port for airships, doesn't it? Indeed. Look, I'm going way far away from it this next week, okay? There's not really going to be any mention of it aside from some comparisons in these next explorations. So you make a good point. I definitely need help, I admit it. Well, thanks, RB. I appreciate that. Hey, Songbird Collage Arts, good to see you again. Hey, M1, welcome. Hey, Daniela, welcome. Good to see ya. Yeah, that's kind of what it looks like, but a lot of these images do seem to have certain issues with them, so we have to wonder about that one. But I found it interesting that someone was bothering to do an airship demonstration, over Iowa. So, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's a good point, New West Reset. They might not have been, but there are accounts that some of them were. So again, it's hard to say. It's hard to know for sure. Hey, Shellbell, good to see you. Oh yeah, and get used to that, Ed. You're going to see a lot of that in these upcoming photos. So again, take that with a grain of salt. That's why I say photos provide clues, but they don't definitively prove or disprove anything. Yeah, from that video, something happened to. Anyway, less mention about that. So here's an example. This is actually a U.S. Army Signal Corps balloon, and this particular image, which I did dig up from some archives, we're told is from Des Moines. Now, how does this image look to y'all? Yeah, definitely coming into dock, I would say that for sure. Yeah, that's a very good point, Officer Donut. And the other thing you think about is that it solves a lot of the logistics quandaries that we've had, if they had the ability to move anything with airships. Oh, yeah. Like I said, there's no shortage of them, so that's why we got to take all these photos with a grain of salt. Yeah, I would say that that's a high probability, but, after looking at as many photos as I have, you start to question all of them, so I don't know. Yeah, I'm with you, breaking free from narcissism. There's something a little weird about all of these, so yeah, that might be the way to go about it. Dr. Diablo, welcome. Oh, yeah. Well, and there's actually accounts of many different nations making them and experimenting with them in many different time frames too. So, it's hard to say. Yeah, the cargo airships. Where's that info, Wayne? Yeah. Yeah, it looks like they may be, although we're not sure. I mean, that'd have to be some serious peddling, so. I think so, Atom Bomb. That's what they said in the actual diagram for this one, so quite interesting. Let's go on to the next. And here we have one of the more famous images, although for some reason a lot of people don't see it, where we have the Graf Zeppelin about to dock with the Empire State Building. So what are your thoughts on this one? Yeah, I agree with you. Stand back up. I think you're absolutely onto something with that one. And that's always something we have to remember when we look at these photos. Are we supposed to see these, or are they just giving us something? You're gonna like one of the later images, not to tease you too much with it. So, yeah, exactly. Yep, they're every Saturday at this time. Yeah, it might. And a lot of people don't think about that aspect of it, RB, and yet that was the whole reason why they supposedly designed that entire extension on the Empire State Building. The whole point behind that was to dock not small airships, but large airships. What you got there, brother? Well, we'll look at an image that shows that in a little bit. But it is a good question. How do they board and how exactly do they go about it? So. Yeah, good point. I agree. It would be much lighter to float. Yeah, we can't get too close to that one. There'll be issues. So, Hindenburg. Now, here's an interesting one where it looks like we see some different little balloons going on here. And I always like this one because I still remember that episode of Little House on the Prairie. So, the front tip, or they've got a little boarding ramp, depending on the type of airship. So, different types of ways. But this image is always interesting because, like, here, get your ride. You can either go on the airship or the balloon. And it's interesting that they seem to be delineating, and you see the two of them right here. This is the airship, and then this is the balloon. So get your ride. Well, that's the other thing we don't know is, did they have a greater technological capacity than we're aware of? You know, it's just what we don't know. So, yep, there you go, Jamie. Good night, John Boy. That's absolutely right. Yes, good one, Officer Donut. Lighthouses, any kind of tower that you can think of, and all sorts of docking towers that are all over the place. And they're a lot more common than we like to believe. And now when you think of these building explorations, this is how this is filled out. Because suddenly these building explorations make more sense. Why do they have these gigantic towers on them that go so far in the sky, especially at a time when it was supposedly difficult to build so high? Well, this is exactly why. So I guess for the low price of a penny, you could get a ride on an airship or a balloon in this one. So, well, that's just it, Scotty. Just like we did with the locomotives that we crash in each other. You know, it's all for a cheap thrill and make a little buck on it, because it seems as though they just had a lot of extra technology. It doesn't give you the idea that they were really testing these and just designing these, that they already had this and they had these to throw away, basically. So, well, there's multiple explanations. Maybe not every building was designed for a larger race of people. We just don't know. It's a lot of theories. You have to look at the facts and see what makes sense when you extrapolate and compare everything. Oh, yeah. I think any one of those would be fun to fly in, really. Yep. We could start that movement, you know. Maybe even formulate a whole new party, the Airship Party, you know. Okay, there's my bad joke for the night. All right. Here's an interesting one over the White House, and this seems to be one of the smaller individual airships. Although this photo, I could say, might have a little bit more veracity to it. Well, that's a really good point, Sky Sage, and maybe it was. Yeah, I had a feeling. In this community it would be a very popular topic, so. Well, and then it wasn't just the Hindenburg, it was also the other incidents that they had. Apparently, there were all kinds of airships that were crashing that got others grounded, but then they didn't document those supposedly quite as well. Yeah, and isn't that a little suspicious? You know, what do they not want us to see, or what are we supposed to see? You know, can you take the image at face value? Well, Officer Donut, that could be one explanation. They also could have used any sort of thing from atmospheric generation to crystal power sources to all kinds of aspects. I got an exploration coming up here in the next month on energy sources that's going to go in a little bit more depth. Yeah, I think so. It definitely makes more sense than a spaceship, although it would be fun to be in space, wouldn't it? Or is air space? I guess air is technically space, so. Oh, gee, yeah. Well, we already did the video on the Mandela effect, so that's a discussion for another time. Yeah, isn't that funny, Jeff Kelly? A little bit of an overlap there with that one. Hey, internet person. Hey, Ganja, good to see you. Oh, yeah, and they definitely used it as quite a good information operation, because they had the cameras there ready to go and everything rolled off with it, and so that was that. Here's another image of it. And here you can see the inflation of one, supposedly. I always find these hangars very interesting, because sometimes these hangars look like they're very makeshift, as though they just threw up a barn around it. Or other times it looks like they put more effort, and you have one of those really nice stone buildings or mason buildings. No, not that kind of mason, but, you know, masonry constructed building. I know, I like to joke about that one a little bit too much. Did anybody see that less than stellar film, at least in my opinion, from the 2000s, Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow? Yeah, that was a rather interesting one. Yeah, well, and there's probably a lot of veracity for that theory as well. Satellites, very likely. And, you know, it's interesting because balloons do have observation cameras that are placed on them. I mean, this is well known. This isn't exactly any sort of classified aspect. So, hey, Corey, good to see you. Well, good to see you, and you're just in time for the good stuff, so. It was an enjoyable movie, okay? I'm just not saying it was a movie that, you know, I went home and I felt like a changed person, okay? I would gladly take that movie any day over... never mind, okay? I'm just going to get myself in trouble, okay? It was an enjoyable popcorn flick. How about that? That's just my opinion. If you like the movie, hey, all the more power to you. You come here and you deserve my honest opinion, so I'll give it to you, especially since we're talking about movies. We're allowed to do that now, apparently. Hey, what's our real story? Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Chassis. Good to see ya. What do we got there? I'm Kairos. Yeah, you go to a certain altitude, and that does become very intriguing. So let's move on to the next image. Now, this is a really unique one, and this is a really unique image as well, because it seems as though we have a little bit more of an advanced airship here. So definitely have to wonder about this one. And look at the design on this. Very intriguing. Right down to the fins and everything. And I can remember back in the day when I think it was John Levi did an exploration, and he was looking at some of the airships, and he compared it to that little airship vendor from the movie The Fifth Element. Yeah, there you go, Officer Donut. The French airship. That's right. Yeah, you're right, Jamie. It does look like a much more organic design. I fully agree on that one. More organic, more streamlined design, as though this is something that they had a long time. This isn't some kind of experimental vehicle. Looks way better than what we see concept cars look, doesn't it? Oh, yeah. Pointy airship. Not cigar-shaped, pointy. Like I said, we're going to look at everything here. Probably Infowayne, probably. Although it's safe to say we wouldn't be allowed to see them. So... Now, this is an interesting one. What do you think of this? With the hangar and everything here on the water. Oh, yeah. The Ferrari. Yeah, that concept. Well, was the material supplied, or were they already found in a depot somewhere and pressed back into service? Kind of like the buildings were. Oh, yeah. Where do they ride? Do they ride in the gondola, or do they ride in the actual rigid airship itself? It depends on the airship. Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, this does definitely have a different kind of look to it, doesn't it? Imagine if you had an airship that could do both. It could be an airship or a submarine. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that one, Scotty. I mean, could be wrong, but it definitely seems good as a design as any. Well, if they came out now, Isaac, that's exactly who we'd attribute it to, because, it seems to be the person who gets a lot of technology attributed to him. True. Well, probably because they were more advanced, Corey. That would be my supposition. Hey, Dwayne, good to see you. Welcome. Oh, yeah. And everybody, thanks for joining us. Please go ahead and hit that like button. Well, again, that depends. We've got some reports saying they could carry hundreds, others saying it could only carry a couple. Who knows? I mean, if you have a large rigid airship that we'll get to, it could probably carry thousands. I mean, look at the size on this one here. And just look at this photo. This is a very interesting photo. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they couldn't get those makeshift hangars made in time, could they? And isn't it funny how those are actually made of wood? We don't really have stone buildings or anything like that there. Yeah, you never know. Well, maybe they did something else to them. What's our real story? And that's actually what we saw happen to the Hindenburg and some of the other ones that went down, unfortunately. So, yeah, it's a good consideration. Now, isn't it intriguing, though, how you see these... Okay, let's not let our imaginations run wild here, but how you see these subsidiary balloons here on the back. It's an interesting design aspect there. What's really going on the ground here? I always love how there's somebody who's very, very well dressed in this. Yeah, that's a good suggestion there, Kairos. I don't wonder myself. Yeah, it wasn't made for that size, was it? As though they didn't care. So it does give you that aspect. Yes, we're dealing with this new, very finicky technology. Let it scrape. It's okay. Yeah, exactly. Lab coat, Sunday best. What else are you going to wear? Yeah, don't they ever. Let's take a look at that. Like, what exactly is going on here? We got the lab coat. We got the guy all dressed up. Ladies look like they're going to church, but they're seeing an airship. Very intriguing. And what do we got here? Yeah, and it's the usual suspects, isn't it? Yeah, I agree with you, Dustin. I mean, it looks like they're just futzing around with it, to use a slang term. We don't know what we're doing. We just have this large hangar, and we got this really weird airship. What exactly do we do? I'm not sure. Try looking that name up and see what you get. I'm not going to spoil it for you. You get some very interesting things when you look up that name. So, yeah, you're onto it, Jamie. That's exactly what I'm thinking. And maybe, Melissa, and that's exactly why they look rather, how shall we say, strange. So, all possible on these images. Now, here's an interesting one that we see that's off the back of a ship. Now, according to the image, this was taken from the back of a cruise ship, I do believe, at the time. So, I don't know. Maybe this was a way that you could have gotten off the Titanic on time. Jump on the emergency escape airship or balloon, and off you go. See if I can get closer on this one to give you a better look at the cupola. I mean, it looks like you could fit a few people there, although I'd say we got two very clearly in there. I might be not seeing that properly, but rather interesting on this one. Definitely not your traditional full cigar shaped. Fly it like you stole it, yeah. Oh, yeah, there's lots of libraries. Richard, I would love to get my paws on as well, but, what are you going to do? Yeah, and, just like the buildings, the airships were salvaged as well, and I think that's what we got to go with. Oh, that's a good comparison there, Kathy. Who knows? Maybe that's where they got the whole logo from and everything. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it might be, Scotty. Well, and Jeff, they tried to inform us of a lot of things. Just go back and look at all Led Zeppelin's covers and let me know what you see. You see some very interesting stuff there. A little different time frame, though, that's for sure. Oh, yeah. Well, either that or they had founded so many of them, they just had too much scrap and they figured out a good way to make a cheap buck. I mean, why else would you do that? So crash them together and have a good old time. All right, so here we have one appearing with the old biplane. And doesn't this one look a little bit more advanced, too? A little bit more than what we'd expect to be seeing. Good question, Eric. That's a very good question. And we really don't have a very good idea behind that, especially the older ones. So, what do you got there, Philip? Yeah, that could be, Philip. And I appreciate that. And I think they did show a lot of indications of having a different energy source. Now whether that was radium energy, whether that was atmospheric energy, or even crystal energy, there's all different possibilities that we could have had. So, oh yeah, probably. This one specifically, RB, let's just say I've got some access to some archives. So, I can't reveal all my sources, but I will definitely post all of these for you to see on the Reddit if you would like to explore them on your own. I'm not sure. I think it's some advanced material that we probably don't have now. Is it a rubber or something? I'm not really sure. Yeah, I'm with Officer Donut. It's probably a mix of canvas, rubber, maybe even something more advanced than we realize, and we don't fully understand it. Now, this image has been through a lot, but this gives you a good front view of it, and this is where we see the traditional gondola. And, aren't these guys getting brave here? Oh, yeah. Yep, I've got an image of that too. I am Kairos. Good call out there. And again, something else that was featured in that very wonderful popcorn flick, Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow. All right. I'm a Jude Law fan. Okay, I'm a Jude Law fan. Oh, yeah. Good call out there, Jamie. Yeah, Kevlar. And how long did we have access to these synthetic materials and how advanced were they? That's a very good point. Yeah, right, cross-threading. You know what? That would have been about as easy as trying to snag something out of the Polk County Courthouse. So, they rough you up down there. Yeah, I agree with you, Worldwide Liberty. They very likely did. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a very likely explanation, is a multi-layer composite. I mean, especially with this one. It's almost like you can see a bit of the canvas, but maybe there's a little bit more of a metal frame, and that's what we'll be told the rigid airship is. But what's the reality? Who knows for sure. So, but good to see the rest of you joining us. Hey, Daryl, welcome. Yeah, and there's no doubt that something went kablooey then, or exploded. Because it always helps when you actually have something like that. Isinglass. No, I haven't, Scottish Tart. Please enlighten me. Heard of a lot of different terms, so I might just be having a brain fart right now. Here's the Graf Zeppelin on the ground. This is a good photo because it gives you a bit of an idea of the scale of it. Yeah, good to see you, Howard. Welcome. Oh, you guys are so funny. You know, and whether it was actually really witnessed or on film, I don't think it matters. You know, we were supposed to see the thing explode, just like we were supposed to see the Goodyear, or I'm sorry, the blimp in Black Sunday terrorize people at the Super Bowl. There's a reason for it. You're supposed to be afraid of these things. You know, they're big, scary things. You're not supposed to find them as some sort of technology. Oh, yeah. Good one, RB. Yep, The Last Crusade. I got to say, Michael Byrne definitely played the best antagonist in an Indiana Jones movie. He was quite interesting. Colonel Vogel. Good call out there. See, you guys get me talking about movies, and then look what happens. So, oh yeah. Well, I'm glad to see we got people from all over the land. So, yeah, it does look like the one from The Last Crusade, though, doesn't it? Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade. But it's really cool because it gives you the idea that these can really land anywhere and everywhere. It doesn't have to be a tower. They could just land in the middle of an open field. They could land at a small church tower. They could land at the tallest building and dock. It's very interesting, and I think that's what makes them very compelling to us. And we know we're not seeing all their capabilities, although I think we have some more hints. So this is one of the very early ones, at least one of the very early images that I found, and this was back when I was starting exploration, so I thought I would share it with you just because it showed up there. Again, it gives the impression of a much grander scale. In other words, that this seems to be a lot larger. What's that there? I am Kairos. Oh, yeah. Yep, you got it. That's exactly what it was. And you go back and you look at it. Yeah, that's true. And the United States military uses them as well. And that's hardly a hidden fact right there. Everybody knows about that. Hey, thanks, CK Malcolm. I really appreciate that. Boy, we're just rolling right along. Now, here is the carrier that we referred to, at least an earlier version of it. And thanks, I'm Kairos, for calling that out. So, yeah, you're right, Illuminating Manuscripts. It does. It definitely does. Yeah, they all got confusing after Last Crusade, but that's just my opinion, so. Oh, yeah. That's another good point, Hairless Primate. You know, I didn't mention that because that was also part of the terror bombing, if you will. And so when they did that, when they used airships, we're told that the Germans used airships to bomb Great Britain in World War I. That was also considered the first terror bombing. Now, then there's conflicting accounts that say they weren't tactically effective, they had no strategic effect, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's all very interesting when you take it all together. Yep, planes were retrieved by Skyhook, an early version of it. You're absolutely right, Jamie. And maybe even by something we don't fully understand. You know, was this repurposed technology? Was this something they already had? Was this something that they innovated with repurposed technology? Not sure. Could be all the above. It's hard to say. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying them, and I will put them all up on Reddit for you to examine on your own. So, did the legwork to find them, and I appreciate y'all joining. So, all right, let's go to the next one. Here you go with your classic docking photo. Let's really getting close on this one. What do you think of this one? Oh, yeah. Without a doubt, it definitely makes me think, too. Well, true. You do want to have the good contrast, too. You're absolutely right. Yeah, and believe it or not, it's hard to find photos like this, Kathy. You can find a few of them, but to show this kind of detail and really show the people getting in and out of the airship for some reason, even though it happened a lot, so... Yeah, that's true, Rebecca, or maybe they just didn't see it. Oh, I might have found a few, okay? Just give me a little bit of time. That's it, Jamie. That's it. Hey, Heidi, thanks for joining us. Oh, yeah. You know, but if you think about that, you know, they had the stairway, and you probably didn't really see the ground that much. I mean, it's actually less frightening than just looking out the side of a plane, you know, and you're all about seeing exactly how that all lines up. Okay, so here's the money shot. What do you think of this one? I was waiting to get to this one. It looks like everybody came on just in time for this one. Yeah, I'd say so. And that's what's interesting too, Scotty, because of all the weather they had to deal with. Now, hey, Paul for Krista, good to see you. So let me tell you the story behind this one. Now, on the archive I looked at and on the caption, what they said was that this was a U.S. airship, and what had caused this unique phenomenon was the wind. So apparently it was moored to the tower. Let's get close to the tower here. Moored to the tower, and then the wind blew it up. And then it was in this inverted angle. And yet, when you look at this photo from a distance, it's in perfect alignment with the tower. Good one, Adam. Good one. Oh, yeah, you're thinking ahead there, Hairless Primate. And that's exactly what this image is showing. Now, just imagine if they had that kind of control, because I find it hard to believe that this is just the wind and they had a camera there, and they had a camera that just happened to catch it right as it was in perfect alignment with the tower. What are the odds of all those variables being in perfect alignment? Now, it's possible. I'm not saying it's not. But let's consider what this could really be showing us. This could really be showing us the ability of these airships to have precision maneuvers, attitude, altitude, and, oh, what's that? Yeah, wouldn't that be fun, Rebecca? But just imagine if they had that capability. I mean, literally defying gravity. I mean, are we to believe it's just the wind, or are we to believe that this airship had far more capabilities to maneuver than we're led to believe? And I think this image is a clue. Yeah, exactly, Corey. I think it's a clue that it's more likely that they had maneuver capability. Yeah, and you just really don't know. But I mean, is it an image that's been altered? Maybe. We can look at it as close as we want to. It looks like it's actually moored, but not sure. And I know the obvious way to say is if I was there and I saw it, that'd probably be the only way I'd believe it. And I'd tell you, yeah, I think it's a fact that the airship really did this. But still, it's a clue. Yeah, I don't know, Kathy. Or just think about that, if you actually had a compartment that's in the top that actually maneuvered along with the airship itself and lined up with it perfectly. Yeah, there you go, Sky Sage. And it's on point, without a doubt. So anyway, I'm sure that one's going to be popular on Reddit. Now, here's one that it's kind of tough to tell scale on. And we have a U.S. Navy one, and we've got a very well-developed image. Some of the structures are intriguing as well. But what do you think about this image and then the shadow it casts as well? Yeah, get your seatbelt on, right? Breaking free from narcissism. Oh, look at that, Jason. Yes, gravity control tech with etheric electricity harvesting tech and stored power capacitors. Could be all. And it could even be that they had larger airships that are even beyond our ability to imagine. Ah, there you go. Yes. I knew someone was going to bring up that nice word. Piezoelectric technology. Back when we did the Crystal Empire exploration. Yeah, that was a hot minute ago. Yeah, and you know what? It might be M1. That's why we have to take all these images with a grain of salt, and why I'm showing everything, because this is what's in the archives. Is this real? Is it not? We got a shadow. I don't know. Yeah, they sure did, didn't they? You know what, Chassis? That would probably make more sense than anything. Yeah, no doubt about it. Who knows? We could be. Gigantic one. Ooh, good reference there, Jamie. You always have those great ones there. Yeah, Bioshock 3. Great point. Sky Cities. Oh, yeah, we haven't explored that yet. That's an upcoming exploration, so you previewed all into that one. All right, let's go to a better image then. All right, so here's your interior. You were all waiting for an interior shot. What do you think of this? Yeah, Last Exile, that's true. Yeah, never any shortage of Navy blimps down there, are there, RB? They've always got them going. Yep, and there was actually a Triumph album called Surveillance, and they featured some aspects of that. Triumph, the band, another great Canada band. Good one, Sky Sage. Yeah, no doubt. Oh, yeah. Well, and you know, maybe the plans that Autodidactic had were probably more accurate than a lot of what we've seen. I think these things were a lot larger than what we realize. Yeah, I agree. It is awesome. I'll have to watch it again. Yeah, and you know, maybe what we're seeing is just a cut down version for all we know. Yeah, exactly, don't they? In fact, if you ever saw The Black Hole, the film from 1979, it's going to be featured on our next Old World in Films review. The USS Cygnus is actually based a little bit on an airship design, interestingly enough. So, oh yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So this is over Jerusalem, Graf Zeppelin, and I think this is a pretty decent looking image. You can actually see clouds in it. Got the dome right there and some of the other towers. Oh yeah, absolutely. They could be very luxurious on the inside, and that's part of what they sold was the luxury. So it's amazing the variances that you have in accounts on them. Oh yeah. Yep, I agree completely. You know, and I think when you see them over these landmarks, it definitely gives a lot of veracity to their existence. So, yeah, you're right, Old World Hastings. And that's where we talk about the conflicting account with how fast the Graf Zeppelin went around the land or around the world, or however you want to say it, or just went in a big circle. Did it take 21 days? Did it take 30 days? Did it take 24 hours? Conflicting accounts. Ah, good point there, Brother Adam. Very good point. Who knows? Maybe thousands. Always like this one because here you can see a little bit more of a well-developed hangar and a more of an advanced looking airship, especially with the fins. U.S. Navy again. Good question. We'll be told it was the Zeppelin family and the Germans certainly, although the U.S. Navy supposedly had some of the more advanced designs. So it goes back and forth. It depends which accounts you're going off of. So, oh yeah. But yeah, go ahead and hit that like button, support the channel. I really appreciate it. Okay, so here's your reminder from Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade there, Rebecca. I don't know. Why does it sound different? Rest assured, I'm the same person. Oh, yeah. Good one. Well, you know, they had a little bit more time, or maybe they founded something else that they could use and pressed it back in service, so. Maybe. It's probably a good explanation as any. So we're just really not sure. But I would suggest that's probably likely. Yeah, just send him an email, and I'm sure, you know, the next thing we know, we'll have the Tesla Airship next year. Get your 2025 model. I'd buy one. You're right, I am Kairos, and we're told they were observation, interestingly enough, and they were also used for markers. Yeah, this is a little bit better of a quality one, too. I think I can appreciate this one a little bit more. Now, imagine the pilot climbing down to that. Now, that would have taken some wherewithal. Oh, yeah, that's true, Kathleen. That's true. Yeah, it might be a product of that name we could get excited about, right? I think y'all are really going to like the floating cities exploration, too. There's no doubt about it. Just slide down the ladder right into the plane like Captain Archer did on Star Trek Enterprise. Remember when he did that, when he slid down in the engine room? Good old Scott Bakula. Enterprise is okay. Yeah, I agree with you, Andrew. I definitely agree with you. Okay, so now here we see a U.S. Navy airship docking with a ship at sea. Isn't this intriguing? And this is one of those other images that you tend not to see too often. Oh, yeah. Might have been, I am Kairos, and there were also plans for much larger ones where they would just actually land in the hangar of the airship, although supposedly those didn't materialize. Oh, yeah, you're going to like that one. I have no doubt about it. Yeah, maybe. You know, who's charging who, though? Is the naval ship charging the airship, or is the airship charging the naval ship? That's a good question, too, and a good point. Yeah, exactly. Much bigger. Yeah, that's why it's one of those good images, and yet it's kind of hard to find. Good call out there. Well, and then you think about the usefulness that would give you, whether it's for a civil application, a military application, it completely removes a lot of your logistical constraints that we like to talk about, at least if we think about a horse and buggy society. Well, if you have an airship and ship society, and then you have trolleys and subways and everything else going every which way, you have unlimited transportation capacity, unlimited logistical capacity. Then you could build all these buildings. Now, granted, over a much longer timeline, but yeah, suddenly it becomes much, much different. Oh, yeah, exactly. Let's get a little closer on the ship, too. Very interesting. Some sort of experiment going on. It's hard to say. Maybe caviar, relentless caviar. Who knows? Yeah, it was the Philadelphia experiment with the airship. Wouldn't that be a cool story, Sky Sage? Nope, I agree with you. What's our real story? Probably a lot of real food in it, too. Great point. So here's one in support of the Navy. There's all kinds of accounts of some of the airships that they used previous to World War II, in between World War I and World War II. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and they are still around to an extent. We'll see some here towards the end. So, yeah, pretty nice image there. It starts to give you an impression in terms of how far and how fast this went. So, good one. Good one. Exactly, Just Blaren. Exactly. And those are all the kind of things that you can see, all the little tricks that they play and all the different dimensions of airships. It's quite fascinating. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's plenty of pictures of those, Officer Donan. I know people have seen those because for whatever reason, they don't mind showing those historical images, but the rest of them, a little bit hard to find. So you got a U.S. Navy airship going over Manhattan. And my question is, who actually took this photo? Because I always ask that question. It was the tower next to it. That was funny when we did the city photo explorations. Yeah, there you go, PJCC West. Imagine if that's how the aircav got around. On rigid airships. Might have been completely different. Oh, yeah, good old King Kong. I wonder if that's what got my university video blasted. I don't know. Maybe I'll figure it out someday. Oh, there you go, Rebecca. Yeah, it probably was a drone shot. Oh, yeah. Well, and who knows? Maybe that was how they disseminated a lot of the population, too. I mean, you think about it. You don't actually have these slow sailing ships. You have airships that can get anywhere relatively fast. And if the 24-hour timeline was true with the Graf Zeppelin, and I'm just speculating here, then what kind of capability does that give you to transport people and materials anywhere in the land in a very fast amount of time? Yeah, Giant took the pick, or King Kong was jumping really high. Good question, InfoWayne. We were just talking about that. We really don't know. Conflicting accounts on that. I Am Kairos talked about how they could have been fast as 200 miles an hour, maybe even faster. We just don't know. I mean, if you think about the possibilities of the power sources and greater power sources. I just might. Now, this is an interesting early one, and I'm not even sure about the veracity of this image, but the reason I pulled this up is this is one of the test ones that they were doing near what is now the University of Northern Iowa Normal College. Apparently, they tested a two-person airship right in the 1900s. Yeah, good point there, Jamie. Ride the jet streams, and then you can operate your jets right there. Really good point. And just think, if you're able to ride on those jet streams and you had more advanced technology, you could even go faster than that. So, yeah, it's a blurry one. But yeah, I'm not saying I pulled anything out of the Capitol Archives. I didn't, but this was definitely not an easy one to find. Now, what's the veracity on it? Hard to say. There you go. Airship Cowboys, Scotty. I wouldn't trust that to do anything, because you know what? It's going to tell you what you want to hear. But that's just my impression. You're more than welcome to try it. Oh my gosh, the movie Slipstream. And you know who was in Slipstream? Mark Hamill. That's where we got to hear the Mark Hamill scream, and then we got to see the many humiliations of Mark Hamill from the movie Slipstream, where he played the bad guy. Yeah, very good point, though. Mark Hamill. Yeah, let's see. There was Slipstream. There was the Guyver. Hey, Quantum Paradox. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, what else would you call it, you know? I mean, he got beat up in Slipstream. He really got beat up in Guyver. We won't even talk about The Last Jedi. I mean, the many humiliations of Mark Hamill. Ooh, Flight of the Navigator. Yeah, that's a great movie. For those of you who haven't seen it, that was actually okay, I got to retract myself here. It was a really good actual Disney family movie from the 80s, Flight of the Navigator. Highly recommend it. Yeah, good call out there, Eric. You noticed that. So that's why I wonder about the veracity of this image. Like, what's going on here? We got the phantom gentleman here. We got the really tall gentleman over here. Not really sure. It's an interesting one. I'm sure it's going to get some fascinating comments on Reddit. Oh, yeah, Crypto Alchemist. Good to see you, and thank you. Appreciate you joining us, buddy. Yeah, we've got the little independent airship here in Iowa again, and we've got the giant next to it. So, looks like a giant. I'm not saying it is. You know, maybe it was just somebody who had a little bit of a condition that caused them to be much taller. You know, we can't jump to those kind of conclusions. Oh, yeah. No, there you go. Cloud City and Star Wars. Yeah, we got a lot of hints, especially in classic Star Wars. Yeah, pity they couldn't recycle that idea. Maybe they did. I haven't been watching Star Wars since 2017 for reasons unmentioned. So, yeah. Yeah, I agree. There's all kinds of things wrong with this image. So we'll go on to the next one. Now, isn't this intriguing? Does anybody know where this is? Hey, Jess Blaren, welcome. Good to see you, and thanks for joining. You said that, not me. So, no, sorry, Adam. You know, I had to get away from Iowa for this one. This isn't Iowa, okay? It's actually on the other side of the pond, as a hint. So, no, not the United States. If there's anybody from Germany or Austria, they might be able to identify where this is, if that gives you a hint. Whoa, look at that. M1's all over it. You are correct. It is Austria. Whereabouts in Austria? Ah, yes, Vienna. And does anybody know what that building is called there, that gigantic building next to it? Yeah, it may as well be the Vatican, huh? It just might. It might have to do something with helium. I'm not really sure. Oh, yeah, good call out there. Okay, well, I'm not going to spoil it because this building is going to make an appearance in an exploration coming up this week. In fact, very early this week. It might be, it might not be. We shall see. We shall see. All right. No, unfortunately, the building is not still around. This is one that did not survive to us. Usually I try to feature buildings that do. So this is an image from Vienna. Yeah, exactly. Vienna hot dogs served on airships, so. Ooh, mercury rectifiers. That's an interesting one. Now, we've seen this image before. This is in Chicagoland. Oh, yeah. And you might have seen some of these buildings before in some of our other explorations. Not a bad guess there. What's our real story? No, they didn't try to sell that one as a high school, although they probably could have gotten away with it. I'll get around to that. Yeah, that's a good point there, Dan. Well, when you get the story on it on the exploration, it's pretty sad, Kathy. So it's pretty sad, actually. It'd be nice if it was still around. Maybe. Yeah, we just don't know. Good old Chicago. That's right. And here's another image of it. And these were featured when we did the Chicago Old World Towers exploration. Yeah, and maybe they were. Maybe they were. Now they show it actually going behind the fountain here, so it does give you an idea of a scale. This is more of a real image. Yeah, exactly. It's probably true there, Jamie. That's probably very true. Oh, yes, the city is amazing, beyond doubt. But believe it or not, there are some other amazing cities that we tend to overlook because of it. Well, thanks, Angela. I appreciate that. It does, it does. But what to make of it? Alderaan. Yeah, doesn't it? Especially with some of those towers. All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to step out for a minute. I'll leave you with this image and I'll be right back and we'll go to some of the real money shots here to close out the exploration. So give me 1 minute. I just have to pull them up. Going offline, talk amongst yourselves. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. Can everybody still hear me? And on we go. Yeah, you should know that I'm battling a little sickness, so that might be why I sound a little different, so even I get sick. So, let's go on to the next image here. This is a good one. Another of the Graf Zeppelin. You can get an idea for its length and the actual size of it. Oh, yeah. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Well, and that's what it boils down to. So, had a big temperature change here. So, I'm just doing the best I can. Now, what do you think of this one? See, these ones where you have the airship near the water, they're kind of the rarer images to find. Yeah. No on-site exploration, so. Shh. Yeah, and those tend to be the harder ones that you can't find so well, and I had to search a little bit more to find the airships that were actually near the water. So, yeah, float and maybe have all sorts of other capabilities behind them. So, oh yeah, without a doubt. Oh yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Now here you can actually see what looks to be a little bit more of a built-up hangar, but this is for the Graf Zeppelin, so who knows if they didn't find it in this kind of hangar. Oh yeah. Well, and it's funny you bring that up, Albie Belt, because Willem Dafoe was also connected with the Nosferatu. Yeah, of course. It's a piece of cake. I know. Sometimes when you look at these airships, it's hard to stay focused for various reasons. So, good question, RB. Or did they carry something else? That advanced geopolymer that we talk about in liquid format. We're up here? I don't know. Good question. Or the design or everything else. It's hard to say. You really can't say for sure, can you? Well, I try to acknowledge it because, I did used to teach it, and, I can say that I didn't always love life. So what are you going to do about it? Now, here we have some interesting images because here we have the more built up hangar, and it looks like they put some additional towers on this one. And I hadn't quite seen anything like this, and I really hadn't seen an airship like this before either. So what are your thoughts on this one? Yeah, probably, Beavis. We just have to say they can, and they can. Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Willard, because that's how they say they got to the North Pole, was by jumping on an airship. That's literally how they said they made it. Good one. Yeah, without a doubt. Let's not bring that up, because you never know. Don't be putting out any ideas, okay? Yeah, it's an intriguing looking one. You don't see ones that tend to look like this so much, so. Well, you never know. I mean, let's just say, I'm not suggesting, but, just say it's a projection. You can go up and you can go tap it. Well, there you go. Oh, Klaus Kinski. Yeah. What was that movie he was in? I'm trying to remember. It was called The Soldier, James Glickenhaus flick from the early 80s. Very interesting movie. Yeah, he played the Soviet agent in that movie. Yeah, possibly. So they tell us, Brother Adam, so they tell us, although it's hard to say for sure. Oh, this looks good. Oh, yeah. Well, some people just can't, Andrew, because they're very, how shall we say, conditioned. And guess what? I used to be very conditioned too, but there's hope for all of us. Hey, Lobo, I think they could have been powered by everything. We've talked about that a few times tonight. All different kinds of power sources. Here's another interior shot for you. Now, this is interesting because you can see a little bit more of the superstructure of the interior, the classic rigid airship. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice, Crypto Alchemist? I think that'd be a great exploration. We should get everybody together, jump on the airship. You, me, I am Kairos, pick up old world exploration, and we'll head on over there. We'll have some tea on the way. We could even live stream from the airship, too. Yeah, exactly. And that's something that we notice on the interior of a lot of the buildings, is how geometrically precise they are. So what exactly are you going to do about it, or what are you going to say about it? Not really sure. I had a feeling you might be. Oh yeah, New West Reset. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to leave anybody out. I mean, honestly, all of us could jump on board. Every single alternative explorer that's ever been out there. Captain John Levi, Michelle Gibson, my lunch break. Everybody could jump on board and we could have a grand old time. Serve coffee cakes, coffee. And guess what? We could take all the rest of you too, because I think there'd be room. And that's the point I'm really getting at here. I mean, just imagine how large these all are. Yeah. We could just do, a 1,000 person live stream. Those are my grand dreams for the evening. Yeah. Oh, Captain Picard. Okay, good one. Because, we just don't know how large they really were, and yet you have images like this. I mean, there's really no limit to what you can think of with these things. I always like this one with the motorcycle in the front, the U.S. Navy one. Now, what's the authenticity behind this image? I'm not really sure. Good one, Jamie. Well, Jay, there's all kinds of population myths there. Yeah, that could be a nice long video, too. I could probably go on that one for a couple hours. You also have to depend on what time frame you're talking about, too. Well, you never know, Corey. I mean, it might be very relaxing and have a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't know who you're talking about there, my bailiwick zone, but that's okay. We can pick up anybody, so yeah, I had a feeling. Yeah, I'm with you, Jamie. It does look a little bit dodgy. Supposedly it is, and we had all those news reports of what went down in San Diego, so that's fascinating as well. Yeah, I think you're onto something there, Crypto Alchemist, because it's a familiar shape. Yeah, and a lot of people feel that way, JC, and there's times that I feel that way too. And then I have that opposite side of my personality where I love to go climb high things, so just depends on the person. Exactly, Chassis. Oh, that was a while back. Maybe I'll have to cover it in a bonus on an exploration. We're still waiting for more facts to come up with it. Some property that was randomly destroyed there. You know that story. Hey, Infinite Jack, good to see you. Well, thanks, OG Scotty Skid Row Interviews. Appreciate that. Well, let's get on to the final images here. Now, here seems to be the closest that we have to a quote-unquote construction photo. Although, again, I'm not sure of the veracity of this one. And once again, this was not an easy one to dig up either. Can't imagine why. It's a recurring theme. And it's not for me to say if you like flying or you don't like flying. Some people love it. I can honestly go both ways myself. Sometimes I love it. Sometimes I'm just thinking, I'd rather just be in the car or walking or what have you. Oh, yeah. And it goes back and forth. And I think that's just something that attributes to different people and their experiences. So, all right. Let's see what else we got here. This is the R101. This was supposedly one of the largest passenger airships built in the United Kingdom, Great Britain at the time. Can't really get a sense of scale, but it is a pretty majestic looking rigid airship. Now, this is the one that they said went down, or at least they pulled it out of service because they had a sister airship that went down in France, I believe it was. Oh, yeah. And so because of that, they had to take this wonderful airship, even though it didn't have any incidents of its own, out of service. You know how that goes. One little thing happens, so we got to ruin it for everybody. Seems to be a recurring plan that you see. I see. Yeah, isn't that funny? Well, that's pretty realistic, though. They don't really ever care, do they? Just go about their business. Even the horse doesn't care. Is there an airship over us? Nah, I don't know. Now, here's another one of these unique designs that you see at Paris, called these dirigibles. Yeah, exactly, Atom Bomb, exactly. Well, and I think that's something they tried to put in our mind there. All reset when I'm ashes. Oh boy. Hope the voice holds out. Hope the voice holds out. Yeah, so you're seeing all kinds of new shapes here, not the old boring cigar shapes. Okay, and now the last one. That image was just a preview from the exploration. Sure he was, Rebecca, and he had quite a wild imagination. No limits to it. Okay, now for longtime viewers of the channel, this image has come up before. Does anybody know where this is? I think we know why they hide all this, because then all of a sudden the explanation about why we can't do what we used to be able to do goes right out the window. 2, it would be too convenient. 3, you can't turn as much of a profit off it if you have airships that go anywhere at any point in time. Yeah, power line in the picture. So this is a photo from a town that was called Berlin in 1911. And then in 1919, they changed their name to Lincoln. This is a town of 200 people in Iowa, in Tama County, Iowa. Now, why on earth would anybody be flying an airship, especially one of this design, over a town of 200 people in Iowa in the early 1900s? It's one of those things that defies all simple explanation. You know, and then there's the big how to do about why they renamed Berlin to Lincoln, because we're told there was anti-German sentiment in Iowa in the 19-teens. Exactly, I am Kairos. And in a small town in Iowa. Well, yeah, I had to throw in a little bit, you know. Yep, vanilla skies, you got some semblance of clouds, but you're just not really sure on this one, so. Yeah, they went way off course, Kathy. We're supposed to go from Davenport to Des Moines, and we ended up over Tama County, and somebody just happened to have a camera at that time. Yeah, that's probably the best explanation there. What's our real story? I'm not sure. There you go. GPS malfunctioned. Our satellite signal was down. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so now we're going to transition here real quick. Give me 1 second. And we're going to pull up some different images. And these are the last images of the exploration. And you might find these particularly intriguing. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I left out a couple. 1 second. This is a good one here. Give me 1 second. Because I couldn't get all these from one source. All right, so here's the R100 docking. Someone was asking if I had an image of that, and I did. Yeah, John Wilkes Booth. Good one. What's our real story? Good one. Hey, Jimmy B-Side, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. It's all good. Yeah, it's parked. And I just love how they have it parked literally in front of a hay wagon, as though somebody was trying to make a joke. Hey, look, it's a hay wagon. And then you have another one of these towers that could very easily be a light tower, or just random towers that are just standing up in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, maybe they do. Now, see here, Marty, when this airship gets up to 88 miles per hour, you're going to see some serious... Shall we move on? Yeah, you're right, RB. You do, don't you? Everybody see the little ostrich? Is it right there? Who knows? Maybe it's being towed by ostrich power. That's how that hay wagon moved around. All right, let's go to the next one. Here's a good one, since someone brought up airships and pyramids. Yes, they do actually have the Graf Zeppelin going over the Great Pyramid at Giza, supposedly. Oh, yeah. Lots of microdots there. Hey, Pete, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. I'm sure you're going to enjoy going back and watching this one. Just run that F-117 around that airship. No problem. There you go. And that's actually where it was featured, too. Yeah, I think that would make more sense than any of the other theories we have there, Scotty. I still love the floating block theory. That's always intriguing. Yeah, and this was not an easy one to come by either. I had to dig through some archives to find this one. Or as Randy said, you can just look at Led Zeppelin album covers and you'll see everything you need to see. That's another way to do it. Well, and you know, somebody actually hiked up there to the tip. Isn't it funny how you can see that the capstone is very clearly missing in this image, or it looks like it's missing, so who exactly knows? Hey, Angela, I appreciate that. That'd be the best way to get it, honestly. Oh, yeah. Now, here is what we're showing now, and we're saying that we're going back to the airship, and this is an artist concept of airships of the future. And isn't it funny how they look just like airships of the past? Yeah, the Zeppelin. Okay, so on that note of future, let me transition to the last set of images. Give me 1 second here. Because now we're really going to go out there. And just bear with me. Share screen, window. Okay. And can everybody see this one? What do you think of this? Now, what I'm showing you, this is not AR art. This is all art done by artists. There was an interesting movement in artists in the 1970s to depict science fiction. What they'll tell us are spaceships. But what's interesting is that they always show these spaceships in skies that are colored. In other words, they're not actually in space. Hey, Setna, good to see you. It's all good. Glad you could join us, and thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Yeah, the Black Knight Zeppelin. Good point. Does kind of look like it, doesn't it? But it gives you an idea for what things really could have looked like in the past. Here's another one. Now just imagine airships like these. Could they have really been this advanced at one point in time? You know, are these supposed to be spaceships, or were these artists showing something that they did actually see? True enough. Yeah, an airship that's classified as a starship, that's actually an airship. That's what I'm positing here, illuminating manuscripts, just to spell it out for everybody. Yeah, ding, ding, ding. And I mean, does that make sense? I mean, to me, it does. Yeah, if only. And granted, it's just a theory, but it's interesting how all those images that came out in the 70s showed you this. You're not in space, you're actually in the sky that we can see with our own eyes. But could these have once been more advanced airships? Hey, Rory, good to see you. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I still try to, I hate to admit it, I'll turn off my brain to watch some of the older ones, or, you know, I focus on the characters and the plot. What a concept. I know, I'm crazy. Oh, yeah, very much so, Kathy. And yeah, we'll really go out there now, and then let me get to some of the more advanced ships that you can see. But it was all science fiction art in the 1970s, but they always depicted the ships, what they told us were spaceships, in the atmosphere. And what's so science fiction-y about that? You know, it was always something I questioned. When I was on the Paranormies, I remember talking about that. Yeah, exactly, Jamie. I guess you really can't. Well, that could be, Vincent. That could well be. Or underwater, too. We just don't know. I mean, you think about the multiple uses for them. And then here's the final image. So here's what you see with the more modern rendered image of what it could have been, how it could have been powered. This is the total ideal, so. Just like it all started with Da Vinci, right, Rebecca? It was all just imagination. Oh, do I ever remember Space 1999? And I also remember how good it was the first season and how horrifically awful it was the second season. Yes. It had some moments in the second season. But yeah, it went from being a 2001-esque high science fiction show to being a schlock sci-fi show in the second season. Oh yeah. We're going to be exploring the wings of the old world. Airships, balloons, and jets. We're looking at the legacy of many of the flying devices, whether they were airships or balloons, And yes, there were even jets, supposedly. We're going to explore all of it, and we're going to look into the origin and what functions and capabilities these flying craft may have had in the old world. And how does this persist and link into our modern day society? We're going to be looking at a series of images of various craft from the old world, and we have to look first into our own mainstream account and history of flying craft. What does our own history, that we can trust, to whatever degree we trust, tell us about the origin of balloons? Because we're told that balloons were the first craft that human beings ever possessed that were capable of flight. So let's see what the mainstream has to say about the history of hot air balloons. And remember, we always refer to the mainstream in Wikipedia because it is the living web page that tells us exactly what we're supposed to think and believe about things contemporaneously. Now, a hot air balloon. Lighter than air aircraft consisting of a bag. Yep. We know what hot air balloons are, so let's go to the interesting part, what they say is the history. Pre-modern and unmanned balloons. A precursor of the hot air balloon was the sky lantern. And of course, we have the reference to the Three Kingdoms era. It's a very interesting account, possibly historical, or whatever you want to call history, although I think there might be some more facts in that account than some of the other ones that we see. Nevertheless, in the 18th century, the colonial Brazilian Jesuit priest Bartolomeu de Gusmao, and I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, that's all right, envisioned an aerial apparatus called passarola, which was the predecessor of the hot air balloon. Amazing Brazilian Jesuit priest. Amazing how they have such knowledge and could be so creative and inspired. I'm impressed. The purpose of passarola was to serve as air vessel in order to facilitate communication and as a strategical device. All this from a Brazilian Jesuit priest. Remarkable. In 1709, John V of Portugal decided to fund the project, following a petition made by the Jesuit priest, and an unmanned demonstration was performed at Casa de India in presence of John V, the Queen Mary Anna of Austria, having as witnesses the Italian Cardinal Michelangelo Conti, two members of the Portuguese Royal Academy of History. Yep. This event would bring some European attention to this event and this project. A later article dated on October 20th, 1786. Okay, so that's 77 years later. By the London Daily Universal Register would state that the inventor was able to raise himself by the use of his prototype. All right, let's move on. First manned flight. The French brothers Joseph Michael and Jacques Etienne Montgolfier developed a hot air balloon in Annonay-Adarche, France, and demonstrated it publicly on September 19, 1783, making an unmanned flight lasting 10 minutes. After experimenting with unmanned balloons and flights with animals, always using those poor animals, the first balloon flight with humans aboard, a tethered flight performed on or around October 15, 1783 by Jean-François Palachard de Rosière, who made at least one tethered flight from the yard of the Revellion workshop in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. Later that same day, Pilotar de Rosière became the second human to ascend into the air, reaching an altitude of 26 meters, 85 feet, the length of the tether. The first free flight with human passengers was made a few weeks later on November 21st, 1783. King Louis XVI had originally decreed that condemned criminals would be the first pilots, but de Rosière, along with Marquis François de Arlande, petitioned successfully for the honor. Okay, this is very interesting. We used animals for tests, we want to use criminals, but we want to be the honorable people who are going to go into the air first. Well, we got to give them credit for courage. The first military use of a hot air balloon happened in 1794 during the Battle of Fleurus, when the French used the balloon. Jean-Pierre Blanchard became the first person to fly a hot air balloon in various countries, including the United States, the Netherlands, and Germany. His most notable flight crossed the English Channel, heading to the Dover Castle, accompanied by Dr. John Jeffreys, which occurred on 7 January 1785. In 1808, Blanchard suffered a heart attack while ballooning above The Hague, fell from his balloon, and experienced fatal injuries. His wife, Sophie Blanchard, continued his profession, but also died a decade later on a balloon due to a firework festival causing the hydrogen in the balloon to be set on fire. Remarkable things that were going on in France from 1760 through 1810, and all this right before the French Revolution, too, which was supposed to be a time of oppression by said king there. And yet they were able to come up with all these remarkable creative ideas and design all these unbelievably large and artistically inspired buildings. Well, perhaps oppression inspires creativity, and we don't want to argue with that. Let's move on and look at some other accounts. So let's look into the overall history of aviation after looking at hot air balloons, and just look at etymology. The word aviation was coined by the French writer and former naval officer Gabriel Landel in 1863. He derived the term from the word aviar, an unsuccessful neologism for to fly, itself derived from the Latin word avis, bird, and the suffix ation. So something unsuccessful became the word for aviation. Intriguing. Alright, so lighter than air. We already covered the balloons, although the most successful Zeppelin was the Graf Zeppelin. So the Zeppelins, and we'll be looking at some examples of them, were quite remarkable. And there's also an interesting history with Zeppelins and airships, especially in how, in the 20th century, it seemed as though society was set on ensuring that everyone was terrified of Zeppelins and airships, and that's been repeated in numerous cases, first with the very popularized destruction of the Hindenburg, which was mentioned here, and yes, I say popularized because somehow it was caught on video. Remarkable for 1937. And then there's numerous references to what Zeppelins and even airships can do if you've ever seen the movie Black Sunday. In any event, we'll go to heavier than air flight, which we've talked about balloons, and there are many competing claims for the earliest powered heavier than air flight. The first recorded powered flight was carried out by Clement Ader on October 9, 1890, in his bat-winged, fully self-propelled fixed-wing aircraft, the Adariol. Oh, he had a nice name for it. Looks like he did a couple other flights, but for whatever reason, although widely believed at the time, these claims were later discredited, so... And then it fell to the Wright brothers. They made the first successful powered, controlled, and sustained airplane flight on December 17, 1903, a feat made possible by their invention of three-axis control. Only a decade later, at the start of World War I, heavier than air-powered aircraft had become practical for reconnaissance, artillery spotting, and even attacks against ground positions. So it's 1903, first flight, three-axis control. Keep this in mind that only 40 short years later, first jet aircraft were being used in combat roles. And not 20 years after that, we had supersonic flight capability. So just remarkable progress in the field of aviation from essentially nothing, although we do have mentions of flights occurring in the centuries before. And it's funny how those hints seem to be peppered in our mainstream account. How old is the jet engine, though? When was the jet engine actually invented? You might be surprised. So you look at the history of the jet engine, and something that comes to mind is, when was the first patent and when was the first practical jet engine made? Well, right here, the key to a practical jet engine was the gas turbine, extracting power from the engine itself to drive the compressor. The gas turbine was not a new idea. The patent for a stationary turbine was granted to John Barber in England in 1791. The first gas turbine to successfully run self-sustaining was built in 1903 by a Norwegian engineer, Jens Elling. Such engines did not reach manufacture due to issues of safety, reliability, weight, and especially sustained operation. Ah, yes, of course. They could achieve it, but safety, reliability, weight, and sustained operation. And yet, they had a working jet engine in 1903. Again, when you look at the mainstream account, you see all of these hints that there were capabilities that existed in the centuries long before the 20th century. It's quite remarkable, and it does seem to indicate that there is a very different story than the one we believe is the history. I'll give a quick shout out to the UAP channel. He does a great job in covering this in several videos, especially the history of the jet engine and how it's probably a lot older than we could imagine. So we've looked at the background of aviation and its origins, and now let's take a look at some various craft and do a little bit of analysis. We started with this picture here, and of course here we have the balloon and smaller device. It looks like this is something that can be used by regular people, and many of us probably have taken rides in hot air balloons, and if you haven't, I highly recommend it, so long as you don't have a fear of heights. It's quite relaxing and you have an amazing view, just so long as you're not doing it through severe weather. But in any event, imagine a device like this that's readily available to the population and anybody has one. What sort of travel capabilities would it give you? And the thing about balloons and airships is they provide an entirely different element of travel that we don't often think about. It's remarkable when you think about how the accessibility to air travel has changed over the decades. Now, we can look at our own history back to the 1960s, where it seemed like aviation and air travel had a very high social status to it. You can go back, and one of the best movies in recent times that you can look at that'll show you that is Catch Me If You Can, where the main character pretends that he's an airline pilot, and that's because of the high social standing that airline pilots have. Now, I'm not saying that modern airline pilots don't have a high social standing or discussing or debating that. I'm just saying the movie depicts that time frame and shows it very well from the 1960s. And yet today, well, we know how air travel has changed, especially in the 21st century. You're crammed onto a passenger plane and off you go. And hopefully it'll be on time, and hopefully you won't have any issues with your luggage when you show up. It wasn't always that way. But what's interesting to me is when we look at depictions of what could have been a previous civilization, whether it's Tartaria or whatever you want to call it, it seemed as though they depicted an accessibility to personal transportation. And just think, every family having a device such as this, a balloon, an airship that anybody could jump into, prepare in their home, whether it was filled with helium or some variants of hydrogen, although we know that there's dangers with hydrogen, or so we're told. It's highly flammable, yes. Nobody debates that. But nevertheless, it's remarkable when you think about having this kind of access to your own transportation, to where you can go wherever you want to go, and what are the limits. And here's another one, and this looks more like an individual device, and some of these could have just been mock-ups or designs or drawings, but there seems to be quite a few of them, and when you look at what they come from and what they could represent, it's interesting to think that were these just inventors' ideas, or were these something that have existed with us for a much longer time? And that's always the question that comes up when you look at these renderings of these pictures of these devices. This one's unique because this seems to show more of the rigid balloon construction, the rigid airship concept. And of course, you have all this rigging and then the gondola or the travel device down here. Now, is this something that looks like it's as practicable as something else? No, not necessarily, but it could be the fact that there are design cues that are taken from other airships or balloons. We looked at our own history, and the accounts tell us that balloons have been with us for hundreds of years, and even longer than 1,000 years if we go off the signal balloon concept from China. Still very interesting when you want to imagine just having access to this transportation. Of course, now, if you want to take that ride in that hot air balloon, it's going to cost you a little bit of money unless you know someone who owns and operates their own. This is an interesting picture because here you have what appears to be more of a different kind of gondola design, where you're looking with more of what appears to be a frame, and looks like there's a couple boxes, somebody standing on it, and I fully acknowledge the fact that some of these pictures could have been altered, and whenever you're looking at old images, that's something you always have to keep in mind. And one of the difficulties with this research is it is very intriguing and it is very interesting to look at old pictures. However, I'm going to let you all know that if you think that the ability to alter photographs is something that has only existed in the 21st century, you need to remember this ability has always been with us since we've had photographs. Photographs could always be altered. I know a lot of people are aware of that, but I know there's a lot of people who think that if you see a photograph of something, it gives you clear, incontrovertible evidence that something occurred. That is not necessarily the case. Okay, when they're asking, well, why are you looking at old photographs? There are clues that we can find in these photographs. And I think there is a lot of reality that's depicted in them. But we just need to be cautious about what we're looking at and make sure that we remember that whatever we're looking at could be a representation of something else. It's not necessarily incontrovertible proof, but it could be the start of a path to truth, and that's why we need to consider it. Still just an interesting concept, though, to imagine a balloon like this where anybody could jump on and go really wherever you want to, and you don't have to arrange all the difficulties with travel and weight and everything like that. Just having your own transport available to you, just like your car or your bicycle or your skateboard or your roller skates or your rollerblades or whatever. Now getting into some renderings of some larger concepts, and here we have more of what looks to be like a rigid airship concept with a larger gondola, a larger group of people, something that offers just some convenient transportation. And we think of our modern forms of transportation, whether it's fixed wing transport or rotary wing transport, a helicopter. Just imagine being able to get a larger group of people, 60 to 100, and easily and efficiently transport them from point A to point B. That's the unique concept that we see with the balloon or the airship or the rigid airship, whatever. And What's interesting about it is you think about the possibilities that it has, not just for personal transportation, but even commercial transportation. A different society that's perhaps a little more interconnected, and interconnected in a physical format, not just with the internet, where we share information digitally, but the ability to really go to places and interface with people. This is another one, a little bit more of an advanced design that you're seeing. And again, these renderings could just be an aspect of imagination or fantasy, but if you watched the video earlier this week, you know what the thoughts are on that. I don't see why it's so absurd to think that there were advanced airships in the past, especially if we're willing to consider the fact that there were very advanced and large buildings with remarkable concepts behind them. If you go down that line of thinking, and if you follow my videos in the 5 eras theory, we know that previous civilizations had remarkable capabilities, and we see many signs of it. So why wouldn't that expand to aviation capabilities as well? And just think of a larger scale of what we saw in the previous picture, where you could transport even more people, and you had the ability to do it effectively, conveniently. And then a figure here, taking this even further with the design, and you see designs like this in the steampunk genre, although this has more of a interesting design. That's something that's reflecting the sailing era of what you see on ships, but nevertheless, the artistic aspect behind it and the practicality of the transportation is interesting to consider. It almost looks like you have another device connected right here, but just the ability to easily and rapidly travel from point A to point B is something that's very alluring to all of us, because everybody wants to travel places. Although one of the explorations we'll be getting into next week is the concept of perhaps there were some aspects of the previous civilization that weren't so desirable, and it could have been how they lived. Now, that's not to say that how they lived was not desirable to them, but we need to remember that things could have changed. And that's why I think it's important to consider the story of the people and what the society could have been. It's more than just looking at buildings and aircraft. We need to consider who the people were that lived in those buildings and used these aircraft, if they did exist. And of course, pulling this one back from the earlier video, because this was just an amazing image drawn by our good friend in France, Lequeux. And this one was really unique because this looked like a rigid airship design that was from the 18th century. And just remarkable, putting it in the context of this video, what kind of capabilities this would have had. And it's interesting to consider what's really being depicted here with this ability to fold down what looks to be an awning, or just a remarkable cover that comes all the way down, as though you have a deployable tent that comes with your balloon. And just imagine what kind of possibilities that would offer for long-range travel. And who knows what potential energy source a device like this could have used, but again, fascinating that someone who is specifically an architect was also drawing airships in their spare time in the 18th century. Makes you wonder. And now we get closer to our modern era. We know that we had airships at the start of the 20th century, the Zeppelin era, which also always had the era of fear associated with it. And if you go back and watch one of my very early videos, Watch the Skies, and cover that very explicitly about the fear that was associated with airships. Fear from traveling on them, and then fear to the threat they pose to people on the ground. And that's a theme that you see repeated all the way up into movies into the 1970s with the Black Sunday movie, where they depicted a Goodyear blimp being used to attack the Super Bowl loaded with bombs. Of course, Goodyear said that they could use their blimp, but they couldn't show the name, at least in the movie. I believe that was the agreement, but it's an interesting movie and it's an interesting concept. But here you get an idea of the scale of one of these airships and the hangar required to store it. And then here, an even more, I would even say, modern shape with the balloon and the airship. Now, I don't know if this is a fully rigid airship or if it's partial or what have you, but it's an amazing depiction, and it seems to be brought to reality what we saw in some of the sketches earlier. Now, again, could the picture have been altered? Yes, I'm aware of that, but there does seem to be something real with this picture. Of course, we have the interesting phenomenon with the skies. Now, whether that's something intentional or if it's just because of the limitations of photography, well, feel free to debate that. And then again, some more renderings and drawings of different types of balloons here. And of course, we see concept of one of the early signal balloons and mixed with many different balloons from many different eras. And this is what I was referring to earlier when I talked about all the different designs. And of course, the terminology aeronautics. And I believe there was a movie on Amazon that you could watch a little while ago. I'm sure it's still available. The Aeronauts, I believe it was called. I never really looked into it because it seemed like it had it just didn't seem like it was something that was particularly interesting, especially to me, what I knew about the history of aeronautics and even my extensive studies of the Civil War about the Union Balloon Corps. So, in any event, it's available if you want to look into different depictions of how early balloon travel may have been, or at least concepts of it. Now we get into the more modern rigid airship era, the 1920s and the 1930s, at least so our official story tells us. And here you have the rigid airship, and I believe it was on the Autodidactic channel where I heard Campbell talking about using the concept of large towers to moor these ships to, and even a very interesting theory that involved using lighthouses. Because there's always that question, well, lighthouses need to be tall to signal ships. Okay, that's fine, but it's not like there's a lighthouse on every single cape and rock outcropping that's out there in the ocean and the sea. So could it have been that another use for them was just a mooring point for all these airships to dock to? It's a very interesting concept, and if you think about it, it could make a lot of sense with what we see. And here's a close-up of that, and loading and offloading of the rigid airship, which is quite a remarkable concept. And how many people could you fit in some of these airships? And we're told about the Graf Zeppelin, which had a world record for traveling around the world as an airship in the 1920s and the 1930s. And just imagine the ease and convenience of travel. And not just the ease and convenience, but also the comfort aspect of travel. Because one of the things that they sold on the rigid airships was the ability that you could travel comfortably over great distances. And unfortunately, with the Hindenburg incident, disaster, whatever you want to call it, they'll always call it a disaster, it really deprived the public of this form of travel. And this seems to be a form of travel that we're never really going to explore again. And those are questions we need to ask. And I'll end this portion of the presentation with the image from the Golden Compass, where we saw a society that seemed to be connected by these airships and what this could have looked like, especially with a little bit more of an advanced technology. Just the ease and convenience of travel in a truly interconnected society where anybody could really go anywhere they wanted to, not just in their state, not just in their nation state, but across the entire land, or the world, or the realm, or whatever you want to call it. Now let's look at the Kimbaja airplanes of the Tolima jets. And the Kimbaja airplanes were a group of figurines that were found, supposedly, in Colombia. Although the actual origin of them is subject to debate, but basically a series of small models, smaller than the size of your hand, that seem to depict airplanes. And here you're seeing different views of one, but let's look into them a little bit. There is a mainstream explanation for this, and it's come up before, and of course you can find it in the usual place. Kimbaja airplanes claim of the Kimbaja artifacts, a handful of the stylized animal figures have been misidentified through a lens of pareidolia as ancient portrayals of aircraft. This collection of artifacts are colloquially referred to under the broad term Kimbaja artifacts, or more misleadingly as the Tolima Jets, the latter name stemming from the 2009 television program Ancient Aliens. Pareidolia, which of course is the reference, and of course they have it linked. What else would it be? The reference to looking for familiarity in objects that aren't recognizable. So, for example, when they showed that image of the face on Mars, they said that was an example of pareidolia. People were looking for recognizable objects or images in an image that didn't have it. Okay, well, you can see some of them right here. Yeah, I guess it's just pareidolia. And when I was out on my run this morning and I saw several contrails in the sky, I thought those were just fish swimming through the sky. But I guess that's not pareidolia, is it? The collection included gold works resembling local Kimbaja animals such as fish, frogs, and reptiles, where the so-called jets could be recognized as a form of bird or fish statue. A major reason for the spread of misinformation was due to the Ancient Aliens segment. Setting out to prove the artifacts were rooted in representations of ancient aircraft. The program does many things to further misinformation, such as labeling the objects as Tolima jets and creating superficial external recreations on remote-controlled airplanes as a form of proof of flight. And I did see those videos, and they were quite remarkable. But of course, the mainstream is going to tell us it's not real, but What's interesting about ancient aliens is if they're spreading misinformation, then why are they allowed to continue to do so? Is Ancient Aliens even still on? No, looks like it's still going. And there's old Giorgio himself right there. I think I would enjoy having coffee with Giorgio a little bit more than I'd enjoy having coffee with Zach. I think he'd have a little bit more of an open mind. And I would certainly love to hear his perspective on some of the explorations and if he's willing to consider them. Ancient aliens, yep. It's misinformation, but you notice we don't ever see that pseudo term anywhere associated with ancient aliens. I wonder why that is. I'm looking at some of the other artifacts, and you see the delta wing design. And again, yes, it could just be your mind and your imagination. I mean, it might just be my imagination making me think that this is a plane. I mean, really, a delta wing design and tail fins? Nah, it's not a plane. Just imagine it. Oh, yes, and if you compare one with the Lockheed YF-12, more known as the design of what would become the SR-71 Blackbird, one of the fastest interceptors ever made, and produced in the 1960s, interestingly enough. And yet you compare the delta wing design on both the craft, yes, again, just using my imagination. And if this was actually an organic object, then what the heck is this supposed to represent? I mean, I would think if I was looking at this that this is some sort of unique power source to the plane. Now, is it aerodynamic? No, probably not. But could there have been scientific applications? Yes, actual science, not the dogmatic ideology of science. Then perhaps there could have been another power source, and there could have been aeronautics and technology that's even beyond our ability to comprehend right now. This does not look like some sort of organic object to me, though, especially with the delta wing design. This looks like something that's artificial, and it looks like it's something that was made to fly. And to give Ancient Aliens a little bit of credit, they did show these things flying. But again, you just can't believe it. It's misinformation. It's not pseudo-history. It's just misinformation. I need to give us a definition on what the true difference is, because I need to be told what to think. Anyways. And then here's a variety of the Kimbaja artifacts, and you see many different designs and types. Now, to be fair, looking at it objectively as I can without having my crazy imagination run wild, some do give the impression of animals and the appearance of animals. But the other thing we have to remember is that however humans developed, it's safe to say that animals could fly first, and who else would have inspired us if we really learned and innovated aviation ourselves, as we're told that we did. And I'm not arguing that we did. It's just really a question of how we went about it and what's the real timeline behind it and how long have we had the capability to do it. Those are all questions. And I certainly invite you to make comments about that and what your thoughts are on the timeline of our development of aviation and what really came first. And then I'll just throw this image in here. Of course, they'll want us to pay attention to these amazing lines, but for any of my viewers who have some aviation experience, what exactly does this look like to you? And right over here, what does this look like to you? Well, I'm not going to tell you what to think. You can look at it for yourself. And for those of you who don't have aviation experience, take a look at the old Google Maps and take a look at some airports and the layout of the airports and the runways. Not to give you a hint, but one of the best comments I think I've seen on one of the videos was the fact that this building was not a library, it was a hangar. And looking at this, I think that was a great observation. And I bring this back from the earlier presentation this week because now, looking at Wings of the Old World, imagine a large hangar where airships were stored, or even planes of some sort if they had vertical takeoff capability. I mean, why would anything be beyond the realm of what we consider possible? And this, of course, is the largest hangar in the world that's still in existence. I believe it's called the Arium in Germany. And this just gives you an idea of the scale of it. It's still standing to this day, although memory serves, it's being used as a water park or some sort of amazing function for recreation. But nevertheless, the fact that they built something like this, and they really did build this, it does show the ability, even in our contemporary era, to produce amazing hangars. So is it really far-fetched to think of what we could have done in the past? And then, of course, going back to these buildings that we looked at earlier, perhaps there was an entirely different function to some of these pyramids, and maybe they had a different function as to where you could have moored the airships to the top of and made your way down. Imagine having that kind of accessibility to buildings. It just brings an entirely different dimension into travel and convenience, especially if you're thinking of a society that based its entire residential or commercial existence on extremely large and tall buildings, not just skyscrapers that we have, but other kinds of buildings, such as large and tall pyramids. Something interesting to think about. The Viminas. What exactly is a Vimina? And here we supposedly have a diagram of one. Well, the Vimina was featured on the opening title slide, or the thumbnail of this video presentation. But what exactly is a Vimina? I'm sure some of you out there have heard of them, but for those who haven't, Vimana are mythological flying palaces or chariots described in Hindu texts and Sanskrit epics. The Pushpaka Vimana of Ravana is the most quoted example of Vimana. Vimanas are also mentioned in Jain texts, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Sanskrit word Vimana literally means measuring out, traversing, or having been measured out. That's interesting. Monier Williams defines Vimana as a car or a chariot of the gods, any self-moving aerial car sometimes serving as a seat or throne, sometimes self-moving and carrying its occupant through the air. Other descriptions make the Vimana more like a house or palace, and one kind is said to be 7 stories high. Remarkable. And of course here, the official account makes it seem as though it's some sort of, it's just mythological. In fact, it even flat out says it. It's a mythological flying palace. And yet there are many different renderings and descriptions in many epics, and we will get around to exploring some of those epics on the channel in the future, of these amazing flying devices, these Vimanas that had the ability for both horizontal vertical travel and no limitations to their range or their speed. And just the scale alone is something remarkable to consider. Well, it's just a fantasy, it's just a myth. But it's intriguing to me that the myth could conceptualize something so enormous and state that it could fly. I mean, what are really the limitations if these did exist? And we have numerous accounts in myth that they did exist. And even some more modern depictions as to what they potentially could have looked like. You know, looking at the different profiles, the different types, and even potentials for how they could have been laid out and designed, and who knows what technology they could have used. But just imagine having a greater ability to produce power and energy output. What would be your limitations on the size and scale of your aircraft? And then of course transposing this with one of the many temples that show the same design concept. Now it could just be a coincidence, but when you look at many of the temples over there, whether you're in India or Thailand, you get this amazing intricacy of the design and just the detail that goes into it. Now, could this have reflected something else in the similarity? Possibly. Could it just be a coincidence? Sure. Everything's on the table here, including the reality that this is all a simulation and that the whole reason we have all these amazing buildings is just to confuse us, and there's really no explanation to it. And we're just chasing things. Oh, so why are you doing the channel? Because it's interesting to consider it, and I believe there's more than one explanation, and it's just interesting to explore. Little note here, it took 39 years to go from the Wright brothers plane to a jet fighter. Yes, the Messerschmitt, the very first jet fighter, and the first flight in 1942, exactly 39 years after the first plane was a glider. That's what our mainstream account tells us. That's what our history tells us. That's how quickly aviation technology advanced. It's pretty remarkable. Oh, but it gets even better. It took 41 years to go from the Wright brothers plane to this. This is the Horton Ho 229, which was designed and fielded by the Luftwaffe, and 3 production models were in various stages of production as the war ended. And when you look at this design and you see how modern and amazing it looks, it's just remarkable. Going from a Wright brothers glider to that in 41 years. And that looks like all of our modern aircraft. A flying wing, considered one of the pinnacles of aviation development. So if that's possible, then is it really so far-fetched to consider that something like this could have been possible to design? Was there some sort of technology that was suddenly made available or suddenly discovered?